3, 2, 1.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
What? If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor.
What difference at this point does it make?
Doesn't make sense.
If you're looking to make sense out of what's going on in the world today, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Southern Sense Talk Radio with your host, Annie, the Radio Chickie Bellis, and featuring Curtis C.S. Bennett and the most interesting guests that you'll find anywhere on Internet radio. And you can join the show and let your voice be heard by dialing 917-889-3675. So sit back, relax, and remember, Southern sense is common sense.
When an emergency strikes, what's your first impulse? If your answer is run to the grocery store, you're likely to find chaos and plenty of empty shelves. So how do you avoid this? Well, it's simple. You use today to make a plan, to prepare for things that may happen. It's a hurricane, earthquake, blizzard, or even social unrest, especially in today's political environment. The practical place to start is by storing up food in your home. And I use My Patriot Supply for my food storage. If you don't have an emergency food supply, it's time to do so. Here's a great item that makes it really simple. A 2-week food kit that comes in a rugged tote. And it's only $75 when you go to my special website, preparewithsouthernsense.com, or call 888-441-7290. This food kit includes breakfast, lunch, and dinners that will last up to 25 years on your storage shelves. So order now and prepare yourself, and then rest easy. So it's very simple. Just call 888-441-7290 or go to preparewithsouthernsense.com. You know what? Let's make it even more simple than that. You're listening to my show, and it's called Southern Sense, and you know you put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com, and click on the icon for My Patriot Food. Well, if you want to insist, you can still go to 888-441-7290 or go to my website, Southern Sense, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. Be prepared. All right. All right, you're here listening to Southern Sense here on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media, the Lone Star Daily News, up on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube, Facebook, oh, the heck with it. Just go to the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. We are also broadcasting simulcast up on Facebook. I started to go up on YouTube today, and I saw there's a problem with it, so I'll figure it out. It's taking me this long just to get it on Facebook. It's a miracle. I'll get it up on YouTube soon. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick Annie, along with my co-host Curtis C.S. Bennett. Good afternoon, Curtis. Am I lisping today? I feel like I am.
Oh, no, you're doing great. I am just chilling. It's nice and cool here. Got that nice autumn breeze for like the first time this year. And I got treated out to lunch by the vice chairman of the Republican Executive Committee here, actually the guy who replaced me. So I have no complaints, you know. I mean, I wanted to go to the beach, but I knew I had the radio show to do, and I couldn't miss the radio show.
As if you need
So
a
here I
tan.
am.
As if you need a tan.
Hey, I'm a Navy guy. Just love the ocean.
Well, if I do sound a little funny, I had 3 teeth pulled yesterday, and it was not fun, and my face is slightly bruised. So if you're looking at the camera and you see a little bruising on my face, that's why, a little swelling. I do feel like I'm lisping a little bit. But we got ourselves a great show here, Curtis. We've got some fantastic guests. We've got Liz Harrington. She is the spokesperson for the National RNC, the Republican National Committee. She got appointed just back this past April. She will be joining us at the start of the show. And there's a lot she wants to talk about. So much has happened over this past week, and I don't think we're going to have enough time with her because there's that much going on. We've got also Dean Reuter. He's actually a constitutional attorney, I believe, but he's written several books, and his latest one is called The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil. And that's a really powerful book. Oh, my goodness. And then also from FreedomWorks, we're going to have John Tamny. He also has a new book out. It's called They're Both Wrong, a policy guide for America's frustrated independent thinkers. And at the end of the show, we're going to have come back Captain Ryan Schoaf, and he's going to be talking to us about Syria, China, and veterans issues, and anything else we can possibly throw at poor Ryman. So we got ourselves a great, great show going on today. Holy moly. So much to say, so much to do.
Yep. Turning Points, too, he's a part of.
Oh, that
Turning Points in America.
That's correct. Turning Points in America. There's a link up on the show page. And I'm glad you reminded me on that one. Meanwhile, I'm setting out the invites to people to do the watch party over at Facebook. It doesn't let me to do it ahead of time, and I don't know why, but we're going to get them out and let people know that we're up there. Anyway, those that listen to the show know that we start off each and every show with a dedication to a fallen hero. And sometimes I have to piece these things together through multiple sources. And this is literally from several different sources, from Defense Maven, from MPR News. We've got from Minnesota CBS Local, Officer Down Memorial Page, as well as Fox 9. So bear with me as I do this dedication. And today's dedication is going to go out to Conservation Officer Eugene Wynn, Jr. of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, the Enforcement Division out of Minnesota. His end of watch was Friday, April 19th of this year. And it starts off, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, DNR Enforcement Division, Conservation Officer Eugene Wynn died in the line of duty on Friday, April 19, 2019, when he was ejected from a boat into the frigid water of Cross Lake. Officer Wynn, 43, and a Pine County Sheriff's Office PCSO Deputy Scott Grice responded to a Cross Lake area at approximately 7:45 p.m. after a fisherman reported that there was possibly a body floating in the water KMSP reported. Deputy Grice and Officer Wynn were unable to identify the floating object from their position on the shoreline, so they got into the veteran officer's boat to investigate further. But within 1 minute of their launch, both Deputy Grice and Officer Wynn were catapulted from the vessel into the icy water. They tried to swim shore, while other deputies attempted to rescue them with a rowboat. He was out there struggling to hang on to him. He kept yelling his name, saying, "Stay with us," witness Katie Schwartz told WCCO. Deputy Grice was ultimately rescued, but they were unable to get to Officer Wynn before he slipped below the surface. All of the ice from other parts of the lake came up, and there's a strong current that goes straight along the river, said Schwartz's mother, Barbara Vidine. When it changed from being a rescue to a recovery, the whole atmosphere changed, Vidine recounted. You could tell it was really hard for them because it was one of their own that was missing. Officer Wynn's body was recovered from the frigid water early Saturday morning. The deputy who was pulled from the water was treated at a hospital in Moria and has since been released. The object that was seen floating in the lake was never identified or recovered. The PCSO said the incident was accidental and that they were working to determine what events led up to the tragedy. Officer Wynn, a married father of two, had been with the DNR since 2001, KMSP reported. Words can't describe the sense of loss we feel at this time, Commissioner Sarah Stroman told the news outlet. Officer Wynn's service at the state of Minnesota is a debt we can never repay. Officer Wynn served his agency and the entire state of Minnesota with distinction, the DNR Enforcement Division Director, Colonel Rodman Smith, said. We're devastated by his loss and ask the people of Minnesota to keep Officer Wynn and his family in their thoughts during this difficult time, Colonel Smith added. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz praised the fallen officer for his service in a statement. As a first responder, peace officer, and protector of Minnesota's natural resources, Officer Eugene Wynn dedicated his life to keeping Minnesotans safe and making our state a better place to live. Gwen and I send our deepest sympathies to his family, and on behalf of the state of Minnesota, we thank him for his many years of selfless service. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family of Minnesota Department of Natural Resources Enforcement Division Conservation Officer Eugene Wynn, both blood and blue. Thank you for your service. And from NPR. A Minnesota conservation officer who died after falling from a boat in a Pine County lake in April was not wearing a life jacket at the time, the county sheriff's office said. The Department of Natural Resources officer Eugene Wynn and a Pine County sergeant were responding to a call on Cross Lake near Pine City on April 19th when they were thrown overboard. The sergeant was rescued, but Wynn's body was later recovered. The sheriff's office investigation found Wynn accelerated the boat away from shore, then made an abrupt left turn. The boat corrected, and both officers were thrown overboard. Two other deputies on shore rescued the sergeant with a rowboat and a pedal boat, but Wynn went under, the sheriff's officer said as it released the results of its inquiry. Water temperature was about 40 degrees, and neighbors reported seeing large chunks of ice floating on the lake. But an inspection did not find anything unusual about the boat that would have contributed to the accident. The sheriff's office says that there were 2 life jackets in the boat, but the officers were not wearing them. Minnesota DNR rules require staff to wear life jackets when they are on the water. Wynn, 43, had been a DNR conservation officer since 2001 and based in Pine City. The wife of fallen Minnesota Department of Natural Resources Conservation Officer Eugene Wynn spoke out for the first time since her husband's death. His wife, Pine County Judge Heather Wynn, issued this statement. I, my children, and Wynn's parents are so thankful for the support of the first responders, Eugene's law enforcement community, and my judicial family in response to this great loss. I am also grateful for the many others who have reached out to share their love and support. At this time, I ask for your prayers for my family. Officer Wynn was thrown from a boat on Course Lake while responding to a call about a possible body spotted in the water. Wynn loved the woods and water ever since he was a little boy growing up in Wisconsin. He wanted to be a conservation officer. Sadly, 18 years after realizing that dream, he died as one. 4 hours before his service, Wynn was honored by a sea of fellow law enforcement. This just tears at everyone's hamstrings, said LEMA Honor Guard Commander Dave Holmquist. From across the country, county deputies, police officers, state troopers, and fellow conservation officers paid respects. And for Governor Tim Walz, it was his first time undertaking this sad and somber duty. With lowered flags fluttering in a stiff breeze, the sound of horses pulling his caisson drew the silent salutes. Soon, a wall of green uniformed COs marched inside. To be here to help support each other and support the family and this community is mourning as well. To kind of come together to show our support and help the healing process begin, Holmquist said. After a brief but moving service, there was a tribute from overhead. DNR aircraft paid a final salute to the officer who loved the outdoors which he served and sacrificed. And from CBS Local, a Pennsylvania police officer who spends his free time painting portraits of fallen officers has created a tribute to Eugene Wynn, the Minnesota conservation officer who died in the line of duty. Johnny Castro of the Philadelphia Police Department posted his portrait of Wynn on Facebook, along with a caption that described the circumstances of the 43-year-old's death. Castro, the portrait artist, has painted more than 150 portraits of fallen officers from across the world, according to CBS Philadelphia. He sends the finished portraits to family and friends and covers the expenses himself. And this is from Fox 9. The annual dinner for the Minnesota 100 Club took place at Jack's Cafe in northeast Minneapolis. The event raised money for families of fallen or injured first responders. The organization works to give immediate aid to the families to help with medical, funeral, and other unexpected expenses. The organization gave over $17,000 to the family of fallen DNR conservation officer Eugene Wynn. And finally, from the Officer Down memorial page. The true measure of a person is not found in the might of their arm, their wealth, or their power. It is found in the strength of their character. There is no greater testimony to one's character than one's willingness to sacrifice all in the noble quest of providing protection to all whom they serve. The author is unknown, but it was posted by Javier Correjo, police officer retired of the City of Milwaukee Police Department. Today's show is dedicated to Conservation Officer Eugene Wynn, Jr. It is also dedicated to all of the amazing men and women that serve as first responders, be they law enforcement, firefighters, emergency services. It is also dedicated to all the brave men and women out there that serve in our military, from the birth of this great nation through today and into its future. We dedicate to them this song by Todd Allen Herndon, My Name is America. May God bless each and every one.
Born in the grip of oppression, I fought for my liberty. I paid with the blood of my people. Freedom has never been free. Now my door's always open to dreamers and friends. When I'm attacked, I protect and defend, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. My strength was not taken from others. Others gave it to me. They believe in the virtues I stand for, my respect for humanity. Now I'm challenged by tyrants who envy my power, but their vicious deeds become my finest hour, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. For those who need me, I'll always be here. For those who will harm me, I'll face without fear. But I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. I'm America, yes, America is my name. Is my
All right. Todd Allen Herndon. My name is American. You get that at toddallenshow.com. Matter of fact, he reached out to me, Curtis, to come back on the show, and I haven't been able to follow up. For those that are watching in on the Facebook feed, if you see my face a little swollen and bruised, it's because I had 3 teeth pulled last night. If I talk a little funny, I was doing the dedication, and I just... I'm having a lot of fun trying to talk today. But, oh, my goodness.
Well, you sound normal to me.
I'm not feeling normal. Anyway, we got ourselves a great show going on. Want to welcome everyone that is listening over on Facebook, up there watching there. Those that are here on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media, and all the other places that we're broadcasting. Just remember to go to our website. It's the name of the show. Put a dash in the middle. Become a member of our website. That way you can go onto our email list. And the only time I send you something is if I got a show going out, which is once a week. So I ain't going to bother you any other time. So just go onto our website, Southern Sense, put a dash, and then don't check it out. Also, check out Patriot Food. I mean, the stuff is great. Buy it. Go out and buy it. Anyway, Curtis, a lot to do, a lot to talk about. Liz Harrington, she is the spokeswoman for the Republican National Committee. She'll be joining us in about 5 minutes. But there's so much more going on. I mean, Curtis, they are, I swear, the left have lost their mind out there. You got call after call after call for impeachment, and coming not just from the Democrats, but coming from Republicans now. You've got, this really gets me. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Curtis, but does not the ambassadors and other appointments by President Trump serve at his pleasure? When a president appoints an ambassador or to a member to the cabinet, they serve at his pleasure, correct? Am I wrong or right?
You're right, just like Jim Comey, you know.
Even though they say
there was a lot of nothing to do about nothing.
Even though they say they have a term that they serve, say, 2 years, 4 years, whatever it is, if the president is no longer pleased, no longer feels like you're serving the good of the country and forwarding his policies, he has the right, that he has the mandate to take your resignation or fire your butt. But instead,
the constitutional right.
Exactly. The former Ukrainian ambassador, Maria Yovanovitch, was appointed under Obama. And shortly after Trump took office. Boy, was that a Freudian slip. Trump took office. She started bad-mouthing Trump to check officials, the very people she should be working and negotiating with on behalf of the United States. She begins to badmouth him, and he goes, I can't have this. I can't have an ambassador working across president purposes with the presidency and with our cabinet policies. This is just not right. So he took her resignation. He fired her butt. So now the left is up in arms because she did not serve out her full term. Do you think Obama kept anyone from the Bush administration in his cabinet or as an advisor or as an ambassador? Not. So what makes Trump any different? Oh, that's right. He's Trump.
What they won't tell you is that the president really doesn't have to provide a reason why he's dismissed someone. That's his prerogative.
No, but instead, they're going to make a whole big kerfuffle out of the fact that this ambassador was fired from her post as ambassador to the Ukraine. And now she's going to be testifying before Adam Shifty Schiff and his panel. And that's going to go real far. And they're making this whole Ukrainian thing into something bigger. Now, we had our guest last week saying it's going to blow up in their face, and I think it's going to blow up real soon. But to deflect the debate, our purpose of saying, hey, listen, there's nothing there. You're going to end up shooting yourself in the foot. They now drag Giuliani in. Now, I think Giuliani may have shot himself in the foot because I was watching when Trump was getting ready to take off for the rally in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which we'll be talking to Liz about. Oh, man, I watched that rally, and if you watch what was going on afterwards, holy moly. But he was asked about Giuliani and these two guys that were, quote, associates of his that were arrested in New York trying to board a plane. I think it was going to either Switzerland or Austria or something like that. They had some hanky-panky, some curious campaign contributions to not only to Democrats, but to Republicans.
Underhanded,
Yeah, underhanded. It seems some of them may have even ended up in the Trump coffers. If that's the case, Giuliani did a huge error if he did not properly vet them. If he hired them as consultants and he took them on, because Trump, when he was getting on board the helicopter, thought that maybe they were his clients, but it seems it's maybe the other way around, where Giuliani hired these two clowns. If that's the case, then shame on him. If that's the case, then Giuliani, I'm sorry, if that is what you did, then man up and respectfully resign as counsel to the president, which is what the left wants. But if you've sullied the waters already, you're only going to make it worse. Let someone else step in. Now, he tried to appoint Trey Gowdy, but Trey Gowdy had a position in a firm that was a lobbying firm. So by law, he cannot take the position as Trump's personal attorney until a certain time period passes. And I think that's next January or something like that, when he would be able to step into the position. So in a couple of months,
sounds about right,
he can step in as Trump's attorney. And Gowdy's a pit bull. And I'd rather see him there. And I'd rather see someone else take over temporarily until they can replace Giuliani and have Gowdy step into the position. But these are all things that, we're going to just watch and play out. I can say whatever I want on air. It doesn't mean squat.
Well,
it's just my opinion.
Is Giuliani out?
Giuliani is not out at this point. Not yet. But let's bring in our guest. And she is a victim to our show for the very first time. Want to welcome aboard the spokesperson for the RNC, Liz Harrington. Good afternoon, Liz. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
All right. We were talking about what was going on with Giuliani and these two guys that just got busted. And like, oh, my goodness. I mean, I was a cop under Giuliani. I marched side by side with him in the Columbus Day Parade. I knew him and his first wife and his son, Andrew, I yelled at because the kid was running around hitting the other cops. But I'm surprised he allowed himself to get into this position. And I just hope that, it's not going to cause more harm than that we're seeing.
Well, I don't think it will, and actually this indictment really has nothing to do with the baseless impeachment charade that we're seeing that the Democrats are running. It has nothing to do with the White House, and has nothing really to do with anything in regards to President Trump. And we also have to keep in mind where this is coming from. This is from the Southern District of New York, which has been very biased and out to get President Trump and anyone associated with him since he took office. And they haven't been very successful. We'll have to see what happens with this. But from what my understanding of it, has nothing to do with the White House and has nothing to do with the president.
Well, it seems like it happened all before Giuliani hired these two guys. So my only question is how well did he vet them, which would also come into question. But that's besides the point. They're just using it to muddy the waters at this point, as you said, to push the impeachment, narrative. And they are trying anything and everything. I'm absolutely amazed in some of the stuff they come up with. It's like they've got a complete mental meltdown over there, starting with Shift on all the way down.
It's been so embarrassing to see them barreling through with this so-called impeachment inquiry, which apparently they're not confident enough about the facts or the evidence because they don't have it to actually put a vote on the floor. Instead, they're hiding behind these rules that they're making up for themselves. They're doing everything in secret. They want to bring this so-called whistleblower to a secret location and not even have them testify in public. It's a complete charade. It is a complete disgrace to our Constitution. And it's based on absolute no evidence and fact. We can all go and read the transcript for ourselves. Everything the Democrats said about this was false. There was no quid pro quo. There was no pressure. And in fact, what President Trump wanted to get to the bottom of and wanted Ukraine's help in doing so was what, in fact, happened in 2016. The election interference with Ukraine in that election, which happened to involve the Democrats and the Obama administration, and opening an investigation against Paul Manafort and meddling in that election. So Democrats, President Trump has nothing to hide here. He's been completely transparent, but the Democrats are hiding behind closed doors. They're clearly everything we do learn from this baseless impeachment inquiry is that this is a very biased source. Someone in the CIA who worked and reported to Joe Biden, who went to Adam Schiff's committee before this complaint was even filed and got hooked up by Adam Schiff with a bunch of Democrat attorneys to manufacture this complaint. This is a complete circus, a sideshow, and it has no actual basis in fact or evidence. It's just another excuse that the Democrats are trying to use to overturn the results of 2016.
Well, the amazing thing is I find that it's actually firing up the Trump base, but it's also bringing over people that may have voted for Obama in the past or Clinton in the past, but they're saying something's wrong here. Something just doesn't smell right. And I'm seeing a lot more people coming over to the Trump side. Contrary to what Fox News did with that skewed poll that was heavily Democratic, trying to show that Trump didn't have as much support. I mean, of all things, Fox News you would think would have a halfway honest poll, and even they can't get an honest poll.
Their polls have been historically really bad. I don't know who does them over there, but the president's right to call it out. They're just not accurate, and they don't help the conversation with inaccurate polling. I mean, when you ask a bunch of Democrats if they support impeachment, oh, well, surprising, their opinion hasn't changed since before President Trump even took office. They've always wanted to impeach him. So that when you ask a vast majority of Democrats, it's not difficult to get a result that shows in favor of impeachment. So we've seen this again and again with bad polling, but this is what this is designed to do. The Democrats are trying to muddy the waters. They're trying to have an air of wrongdoing. This is what they did for over 2 years with the Russia hoax, even though it was completely baseless. There was no basis in fact whatsoever. There was no concrete evidence at all. It was spin, it was leaks, it was innuendo, it was a friend of a friend of a friend may have been somewhere and may have talked to a Russian once. It was completely bogus. And then we spent $32 million, had 19 Democrats working, uncovering every rock they could find. And what did they find? Nothing. They found no collusion. They found no obstruction. It was the most biased investigation you could come up with, and they came up empty because President Trump never had anything to do with Russia. It was a complete lie. And so now that failed, they're moving on to something else, and it's completely manufactured. But Americans and the public gets it. They're smart. They see through it. It's the same playbook. It's the same dirty tricks. Democrats have not come up with any new ones. And so it's the same game. We're sick and tired of it. And we're tired of Democrats not doing any work for the American people. They refuse to do anything. They refuse to pass USMCA. Today you have Mexico, the president of Mexico calling on Nancy Pelosi to bring it to the floor. It's a very sad state of affairs when the Mexican president has done more than Americans and the Democrats in Congress has to address our border and to address trade. It's absolutely appalling.
Well, South Carolina here is first in the South for the primary, and we got the primaries coming up in June. So we've got the Democrats all over the state. And my district, we lost, Mark Sanford lost to Katie Arrington, then she lost in turn to Beer Can Joe Cunningham. And here in South Carolina, I love Drew McKissick, our state GOP. I mean, he's a friend of mine, and I could eat him up. He's just so wonderful. And he's been organizing these rallies against Beer Can Joe. He was up in Myrtle Beach last night, and we're going to have another one at his headquarters here near where I live, just a couple of miles down the road. We are actively here in various states working to get some of these Democrats out of office that are in there. And I know in Minnesota you've got the same thing going on over there. I watched that rally last night, and oh my goodness, it was phenomenal. And, you had Trump at the rally call out the mayor because the mayor, I think he charged Obama something like only $20,000 for his rally, but he wants to charge Trump over $500,000, something like $530,000.
Right.
$1,000. And he also called out the congressman from Minnesota, also recognizing him. The question I have right now in the chat room, and I think everyone in the nation has, is how many more of our Republican congressmen and senators are going to step up behind Trump. Because you see someone like Romney, just trying to pull the votes away. You have someone like Justin Amash pulling the votes away. Are we going to see more and more of our elected officials standing behind him the closer we get to the election and primaries?
Yes, it is such a dwindling few who have, voiced opposition. It's absolutely pathetic. I think, Senator Romney, the junior senator from Utah, should keep in mind that back in 2012, when he was running for president, the Obama administration, that was just the quaint days when they used the IRS to target conservative groups. They didn't actually target his presidential campaign. They saved that for President Trump. They saved that for weaponizing the CIA and the DOJ and the entire intelligence community apparatus against their opposition, President Trump, the opposing political party. It's absolutely appalling. So he should know better than anybody just what the Democrats do. I mean, to sabotage and to influence our elections. They did it. He should know. He should remember what they did to outside conservative groups trying to meddle in 2012 with the IRS. And then, of course, they did it again against President Trump and spying on his campaign. So I can tell you the vast majority of Republicans and certainly our voters are united behind this president, and they're so excited to see someone who does not let the liberal left set the terms of the debate. He does not let them define him. He's out there last night. You mentioned the rally. It was an amazing speech, just combative against the false narrative, but also uplifting and for law enforcement, bringing cops on our stage. Just amazing show of love and just spirit and great feeling for our country, and that's what this is about. And then you look outside that arena, and these radical left-wing Democrats protesting, rioting, spitting on Trump supporters, burning things, inciting violence, throwing urine at cops, and not a single Democrat will condemn this behavior. This is out of control, and so this dwindling few of the Republican minority who, about 2% that does not have approval, that President Trump has failed to get their approval, they should know that this is what they're endorsing then. This is what we're up against, and it was very vicious. It was very horrible what happened outside. They say love trumps hate. Well, there was a lot of love in that arena with President Trump and his supporters and our supporters. There was a lot of hate outside from the Democrats, and that's what we need to fight and push back against.
Yeah, that really disturbed me because this is a Democratic city, and he went there because he wanted to put a footprint in Ilhan Omar's district. There was a definite purpose for that, to rally people behind there to get her out of office. And when I saw the assault on police officers, that just drove me up the wall because I was a cop under David Dinkins, and he did the same thing to us, hamstringing us. And I know those men and women out there must have been so frustrated. It should never occur. And the fact that you don't even have the left saying, you're breaking the law, this is not how we get our message across. We're the ones saying, don't break the law, get the message across peacefully. And you saw people just talking, trying to say, why are you doing this? Here they're surrounding cars. You have to have the cops now barricade the cars to protect the innocent individuals. Why can't the rest of America see that lawlessness doesn't work?
It's so disturbing, those images. And where's the rest of the media? Where's MSNBC and CNN today? Can you imagine what they would do if a Trump supporter behaved in even a fraction of the behavior that we saw last night? I mean, it's absolutely appalling. And now I'm looking up at my television screen, and CNN says, what Trump's cussing and cut downs mean for the country. Give me a break. What does this rioting and incitement to violence and throwing urine at cops, what does that do to the country? Because that's what Democrats are condoning with their silence. And give me a break. These people, and you're right. I mean, those images, it's just, it's appalling and it's disturbing. And yet the media refuses to cover it. Oh, and President Trump says hell and they freak out. I mean, it's absolutely, the double standard is So,
this is my co-host.
beyond the pale.
This is my co-host Curtis C.S.
Liz.
Bennett. Go ahead, Curtis.
Yeah, you never hear the left say anything about, Hollywood when they have their little galas on television, they're cussing and everything. And it's all directed at the president, Robert De Niro, you name it, They all have four-letter, adjectives that they love to express, when they have a national audience. But you never hear from the media about that.
Exactly right. And remember, Madonna at the Women's March saying she wants to blow up the White House. I mean, there's so much hatred and hostility. And, it's very Orwellian. Like, we can see through it. They say, love Trump's hate. And then you look at the contrast. And anyone that's actually been to a Trump rally knows we have the best supporters. They're just freedom-loving Americans. They're kind to people. There's a video of a Vice reporter interviewing one of our great supporters wearing a MAGA hat and outside yesterday in Minnesota, and somebody comes up and spits on our Trump supporter. And he handles it with so much dignity and class. The Vice reporter is absolutely terrified and appalled. But it just shows you this is where the hate is coming from. They are not tolerant. Liberals lectured us about tolerance for decades, and then look at their behavior just because they lost an election. It's unhinged. They've been rioting. Look at how they behaved during the Kavanaugh confirmation. This has been unhinged, radical behavior that, once again, the media doesn't cover. The Democrats refuse to condemn. And there's just such a ridiculous standard. But the good news is we don't have to depend on a couple news networks to get our information anymore. We can see it for our own eyes. And you bet independents, seeing these images, they're going to be turned off, because this is not what we want our country to be. This behavior is just despicable, and we've seen it again and again from the radical left, and you're not seeing it from President Trump. And the contrast couldn't be more clear when you look at what President Trump's talking about and uplifting the country and talking about the jobs coming back and the opportunity, and then you look at the radical, unhinged left outside that building. It is absolutely appalling.
Well, there's one difference between us and the left is that we keep our sense of humor. They tried to put us down when they came out with the TV series All in the Family, thought they would embarrass and shame us. Then we got called hobbits by John McCain. We got called deplorables by Hillary Clinton. And every time they do that, we play on that. And we make it our own name now. So I am one of the deplorables. Hashtag I'm deplorable. You see that over and over again. And I got to admit, the other day I was in the gun shop. Yes, I was buying something. And I saw a local businessman, and I was chatting with him because I hadn't seen him at one of my Tea Party meetings recently. And he goes, "Oh, no, I came up with a new bumper sticker." And he goes, "Vote MF 2020. And I stopped for a second, and I happened to have been wearing a T-shirt that had the initials WTF on it. And I looked down at my T-shirt, I looked up at my friend, and I says, "I love it." Because remember, the California Congresswoman Rashida turned around and said that they were going to arrest or jail the MF. And I said, I love it. And people are just hurl whatever you want at us. We're going to take it with a smile. We're going to turn it back on its head. And with people like you and people like Ronna McDaniels backing us up, we're going to sweep 2020.
Absolutely. And I love that. I think it's so great, and it really does embody who we are. We're not going to let these people silence us. We're sick of you looking down on us, but we wear it as a badge of honor because we love this country, and that's what it's all about. And I love when we kind of just took the deplorable mantle as a badge of honor, and we took that slogan away from them because, when Hillary Clinton says that, and you see and you hear her words, she's really angry when she says that, and it really is sad because this is all they have. Government is their religion. This is their be-all, end-all. And then for us, we love this country. We love our fellow Americans, and we just want to be left alone. We want our freedom. We want to enjoy the great freedoms that were established in this great country, unlike anywhere else on earth ever before. And that's what we're fighting to preserve. And you're so right. I love the sense of humor, and it's so great to watch any of these Trump rallies or the president when he goes out and speaks at official events or otherwise. He has a great self-deprecation. He has great sense of humor, and he's optimistic, and it's a really positive image. And the media gets this wrong all the time, and they'll never understand it. But it's actually a really upbeat, fun, optimistic vision every time he gets out on that rally stage, and it's really great.
Well, there's one thing I did notice that the previous RNC chairs. And Chad Connolly happens to have been a friend of mine also. Ronna McDaniel is bringing something special that the previous chairs didn't have. She's got a certain knack, a certain gift, a certain talent. She's got people like you that support her. That I see a change in the national RNC. I just wish it would then go further out to the rest of the states where they can then start getting more candidates to come up against people like Ilhan Omar and the other members of the Mod Squad and start getting back control of our nation. But she's got such power that I see that I haven't seen in quite a long time.
Yeah, and it's because she's a real American, and she's, a mom from Michigan, and she, knows her home state so well, and she knows who real Americans are. And that's been a great thing about President Trump being an outsider. It's a paradoxical in a way, this billionaire successful in private industry, but he really connects with the forgotten men and women of this country, and he has the common sentiments of what we all feel and what we love about this nation. And so it really has brought in a lot of people. We're tired of, elites, and including elites in our own party that look down upon their own voters, and they look down on the American people. And President Trump does not, and he says it all the time. He says, the public gets it. They're smart. And you'll never hear a politician on the left, a Democrat, say Americans are smart. They don't think we're very smart. They think that they, from their pedestal in Washington, can, central plan down to our every fabric of our lives. They don't think they need to social engineer. They need to, control every aspect because we're too stupid to do it ourselves. And that's what the left thinks. And it's been a great time to see someone coming from the outside, having some common sense, putting America first. And it's really, I think, given the Republican Party a real backbone and real confidence, and to support him and to drive that message home. And so it's been it's a great organization to work for, and that definitely starts at the top with our great chairwoman, and it starts also at the top with the president, really bringing in so many great people who just love this country and want it to work for everyone.
Well, we've got just one last question in the chat room about the rally, and then I just want to talk about the job numbers because I know you have to run. He wanted to know, he brought Tom Compton in, who's actually from Arkansas, into the Minnesota rallies. I've seen that in several other rallies where he brings in elected officials that are not from that state. Is there a purpose to that, or is he just trying to help spread the individual's profile?
Yeah, I think maybe it was a personal request to come to that one. I'm not exactly sure, but it's always the more the merrier, and he always does highlight local officials and people from the state. I know tonight he's going to be in Lake Charles, Louisiana, so you're going to have Senator Kennedy there, and so we'll have a good showing in Louisiana as well. But I think it's all about highlighting, who can attend and who's wanted to show up.
Yeah. Now, you had mentioned, actually, Gabriella sent me a message saying, talk about the job numbers. So I pulled them up and I went, holy moly, no one's talking about this. That in just the few years that Trump has been there, he has added since 2000, a total of U.S. jobs added was 16.2 million. And since 2000, 10.5 million have been part of that. But in just 2017 and 18, he's added 3.5. That is such a tremendous jump over the previous years. Since 2000, it's more than 20%. And since 2007, that's something like, more than 33%? It's a tremendous number in just 2 years. And they're not talking about that. They're saying, oh, the economy is starting to go into recession. Manufacturing jobs are slowing down. I don't know about that.
Right. It is absolutely absurd. They'll never cover any of the great news we've seen. And this is, I mean, everyone remembers, no one's nostalgic for the Obama-Biden years in the economy. There's a Harvard study that came out, 95% of the new jobs created under Obama were part-time or temporary positions. They were not full-time good jobs. And now we've seen a reversal in course. We've seen the amazing things that the American worker can do when you get government out of the way, when you level the playing field to make us no longer the highest taxed nation on earth. It's good for business, it's good for employees, and it's been especially good for employees when you look at the wage growth, because since employers have to compete now, there's over 1 million more job openings than unemployed people in this country. They have to work really hard to keep you, so they have to pay you more, and the quit rate is something that never gets mentioned, but it's a great indicator for where the state of the economy is. It's been at almost record highs throughout this year. So that means people are leaving jobs that they have for better ones, and it's a very healthy sign of the economy. So it's a direct result of the pro-growth policies that were put in place by President Trump, and there's no doubt about it. And the Democrats, when they get in the debate stage, the last debate, they didn't even mention the economy. They don't even want to touch it, because how can you compete against this? And the only time they bring it up, you have Elizabeth Warren saying she wants to restructure the U.S. economy. I don't want to restructure from where we are now, which is the lowest unemployment in 50 years.
No.
Liz, I got one question.
Yeah.
What is the party going to do about, or do they have a plan to reach minorities for this upcoming election and for future elections?
Absolutely. You know, a big thing we're highlighting is the record low unemployment, for sure, for African Americans, for Hispanic Americans, but we're also showing the contrast in a lot of these cities and that have really left them behind. Baltimore is a good example. We put an opportunity zone through the tax cuts in that state. It's so great that Kamala Harris put one of her campaign headquarters inside that opportunity zone. So we're going to be talking about the economy. Those opportunity zones are amazing to really get left behind communities in urban centers that have been lacking in outside investment. This gives them huge incentives to get business growing and turn these communities around. So we're touting that. We're, of course, the economy, but also just issues like securing the border. That's why we're active in New Mexico, because our data shows, you know, you have a Democrat Party who's railing against our Border Patrol, who's calling our ICE agents, comparing them to concentration camps and Nazis. And then you have the people that actually live there and who know the Border Patrol and are majority Hispanic and Spanish speaking. They understand the most how important it is to secure the border. So our data has shown us there's a tremendous opportunity to show the contrast between what our policies and what we want to do in protecting our sovereignty and not just giving away welfare to illegal aliens who cut the line and stepped one foot in this country and didn't go through the legal process. We have a huge opportunity. The Democrats have gone so far to the left on issue after issue, whether it's the open borders, whether it's abortion up until birth. I mean, there's a big opportunity to show, look at what President Trump has done. Look at what he's done in coming in and fulfilling the promises he's made, securing the border, growing the economy, the most pro-life president we've ever had. And then look what the Democrats are offering. It is so radical. and kicking us off our private insurance and going to a one-size-fits-all socialized medicine plan, and yet giving it and promising it away to illegal aliens. These are types of issues that we can show the contrast. And they've had such a stranglehold on some of these different demographics for years. Democrats are really dependent on identity politics. We believe our ideas are better, and we'll be able to convince any voter, no matter where they are, where they live, what race, what sex, what religion. We can convince them that our ideas are better, and so we're really excited about that.
Well, Liz, I'm excited too, and hopefully if you come here to South Carolina to visit, we will get to meet each other. Just have Drew call me, and
Absolutely.
I'll be there. I will be there in a heartbeat. But you're going to be with us next week also, I believe, too, right?
I'm not sure what my schedule is. I might be in Dallas, so we'll have to work that out.
Well, Liz, it has been a pleasure, and God bless you for the hard work you do.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Check out Liz Harrington, RNC, the RNC website. Go to GOP.com. Blah, blah, blah. Teeth in backwards. We got a new guest coming in on the show. He's an author with a new book out. It is called, let me make sure I get this name correctly so I don't screw it up too badly. The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil. It is a powerful book, and let me just get the book out here so I can talk with the gentleman. Want to welcome aboard Dean Reuter. Good afternoon, Dean. How are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am doing fine, too. Just bear with me as I try to get myself a little organized here. Forgive me. I'm just trying to get my little screens up here.
Let me just start by saying thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and your listeners.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And I'm holding up before the camera, which is live on Facebook, a copy of the book, so people can see all the little Post-it notes in there that shows I do read the books. Not like some of the people that
That's impressive.
I actually end up
reading. That's impressive. I've been on some shows where I can tell the host hadn't read the book or hadn't read much of it, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, actually, I did not read the notes that was sent to you about the questions I should be asking you, so you're not going to get the standard questions. You know, this is a very interesting book, but I also found a little interesting. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, because here I thought you were going to be like a historian who's writing a book, and I found your pathway completely different, which brings me to a second part of the question. What brought you to write this type of book when I know you normally don't handle this type of material?
No, you're right. I'm normally writing about law and policy, so maybe I can answer both questions at once. I'm a lawyer by training. I've lived most of my life in the Washington, D.C. area. I've worked for a couple federal agencies in the Inspector General community, meaning federal law enforcement, overseeing audits and investigations, criminal investigations. And I've done a couple law and policy books before. I've spent the last 20 years or so working with the Federalist Society, which is a great organization that your listeners ought to check out. We have a website, of course. But about 12 years ago, a friend of mine who I knew from college reached out to me because he is a World War II buff, and he had been doing some research on different aspects of World War II. And he came across this one Nazi general, a fellow by the name of Hans Kammler, and he was very intrigued by him, started doing more and more research. As he's doing that research, he then encountered Dr. Colm Lowry, another World War II buff, a serious World War II buff, in Northern Ireland, researching the same general. Researching Hans Kammler, and they came across one another in a World War II forum online, and they started to become friends, wary at first with one another, but ultimately decided that they wanted to try and share information and see how their documents and their what they thought they knew about Kammler, how their pieces of the puzzle fit together. So Keith came to me originally as a lawyer and a friend to write a collaboration agreement so the two of them could share their information. And that's how I got involved initially. And then, Keith started feeding me bits and pieces of the story of Kammler, at least what they knew of it then. The research was still underway, and he described a spectacular set of circumstances that I was very skeptical of, honestly. I mean, I'm skeptical by nature, and my training as a lawyer makes me even more skeptical. But I was immediately intrigued as well because my entire ancestry is German, so I've always, although my family came here in the 1860s, I was always interested in what happened in World War II. And because my father was a U.S. Army officer, I happened to have been born in Heidelberg, Germany, so I have an extra layer of sort of interest in World War II and how such a highly cultured country like Germany could go so screamingly off the rails during the war.
Well, like you, I'm of German ancestry. Matter of fact, the part of Bavaria that my family came from is now part of Poland. My grandfather, prior to World War I, was brought over with his brother, and when his father got off the boat at Ellis Island, proceeded to the nearest orphanage in Brooklyn and dropped the two boys off. So they grew up in an era going up to World War I. And a matter of fact, they changed their last name from von Koenig to its English translation of King so that they wouldn't get beat up. Because at that time, he said they were literally taking dachshunds prior to World War I and burning the poor dogs in the street. The things that were being done against German Americans in the name of patriotism. And my grandfather later on served in the Army in World War I. Believe it or not, he was so tiny that they had him, and he was a musician, so they had him in the Army band, but he served in Germany playing in the band. My other grandfather from Italy migrated here prior, and he also served in the Army, in the American Army, going into World War I. And my father ended up being part of the occupation troops in Germany after the war. His job in Frankfurt and in other cities was to rebuild the telephone system that we bombed the hell out of. And here a corporal was telling majors and lieutenants on how to do this work. He knew how to do it. They didn't. So when I was reading the book, I was also bringing my own history into it. And you took a very interesting take on when you wrote the book, one that I truly haven't seen in the manner in which you did. You tell the story not only about Kemmler and what was going on, the history of him going up, rising through the ranks with his job that he had under Hitler and his rise to power and the other things that went on. But you also told us how the three of you put the story together, how you ended up delving into the archives and finding little bits of pieces here and little bits of there, little strings that you would tug on to bring you into the next stage. So the three of you are as much a part of this story as are the Nazis and the Americans.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting. These researchers, they're on the cover as co-authors, Dr. Colm Lowry and Keith Chester. They were just so excited about this story and the process, the hunt to reveal this man who was so atrocious yet so powerful, yet unexamined by history. We were so excited about the discovery that we felt like the way we worked ourselves through this puzzle, uncovering one piece after another, was interesting as well. And when I started telling people about the story, the inevitable first question they asked is the same question you asked. Well, how did you come to this? And how did you find him? And how did you search out these records? So we made what we thought was the easy call, a little unconventional, but the easy call to write this in the first person and make ourselves part of the story and make the hunt part of the story. And really, I mean, that part has a different usefulness for some readers. If they're interested in trying to do a book project, especially one that requires a lot of research, it's a bit of a playbook for that.
Yeah, going for the FOIAs and pulling out one little segment and going, wait a minute, and then you find that one agency will give you the documents, another one won't. And you'll get denial here, but you can go through this other door in which to get the information you need and the collaboration and the corroboration. And it is really mind-blowing on how much work you went through. And they were doing this years before you even joined the project.
That's exactly right. The collaboration agreement, my introduction to the project was about 2007, and they had already been working on it for quite some time. And, they just put in tremendous amounts of effort. One of them was researching here in the United States at our National Archives. Dr. Lowry Coleman is over in Europe, in Northern Ireland, but traversing Europe, looking through all the records. A lot can be done online now, but there are also records you wouldn't believe in small libraries, university and college libraries across the country. Air Force bases and military installations have different records. So you have it's excruciating, and you really develop a lot of expertise along the way, not only as to where to look, but what to ask for. That's a key component. And then one fascinating part I found is I could look at a document in 2012, for example, not see much in it, but then another 3 years later, after I've learned more and more and more about these personalities or that personality or this event, something would jump off the page of that document I saw 3 years ago, and it just changes the entire complexion and importance of that document. So it's a fascinating process, and really interesting to be part of.
It's funny because you mentioned about getting documentation from the Germans. They don't throw anything out. Basically, because my husband, his family fled from Latvia during the war. My husband's father was in first off a German POW camp, and then eventually a Russian, and then eventually into an American POW camp, because they had no idea that these Latvian soldiers were not part of the Nazi army or the Russian army. And my husband was born in a displaced person camp in Augsburg, Germany. And after we got married, I needed a copy of his birth certificate for something. I was able to write to Augsburg, and using Google Translation, I translated it into German for them. They were kind enough to translate it back into English and send me the birth certificate. And I was amazed that here, after the war, everything's confusing, things get lost. You're dealing with whole entire cities completely burned out. And yet this one tiny little birth certificate survived. It is amazing how they can keep their paperwork.
That is amazing, and they're reputed to be meticulous record keepers, and we found that to be true. Lots of good records came out of the German archives. In something of a contrast, on the American side, I think there's a lack of organization there. People continue to go through these records and start to organize them. Some of them are being digitized now. But there were a couple agencies that we were particularly interested in, and one of them it's known that there are no records. All the records for this particular agency from 1945 to 1947 are gone. They're just gone. Another agency from that same era, 5 million pages of records were destroyed as incidental. So it's a striking thing when you're trying to do research and you come across obstacles like that, because then you're left wondering, what is it we don't have? We have this document, but I wonder if there had been a backside to this document, would it invalidate the front side, or would it augment it somehow? So it's a very, very interesting and in some ways trepidatious process.
Well, when I started reading the book, I had never heard of Kammler before. Everyone knows Goebbels, they know Spears, they know Himmel, they know all these other names. And yet you had someone with just as much power as all the others had, and yet no one knew his name. However, I found it interesting that also World War II is the most written about era in history ever written. And very few people knew who this person was.
Yeah, you shouldn't. You are in good company if you've never heard the name Hans Kammler before. But you're right. World War II was the most massive human undertaking in the history of the world. More people, more movement, more calamity, more effort exerted. Probably more stories of barbarity, but more stories of heroism ever on every continent of the world. The war was fought. People lose sight of that, and. Nobody has heard of Hans Kammler, although he was as evil as they got and as powerful as they got. Nobody heard of him because at the end of the war, his driver reported that he had killed himself, suicide, near Prague. And everybody bought into that story. Everybody believed that story. and nobody went looking for Hans Kammler is really an extraordinary thing. But the idea that he had committed suicide really didn't sit well with Keith or Colm or me. We'd already done sort of a lot of biographical work about Hans Kammler, and he wasn't the sort of guy that was going to give in or give up, commit suicide. So Keith and Colm really kept digging and digging and digging, and lo and behold, we find out, and this is part of the mystery of The Hidden Nazi, the book, he didn't commit suicide at the end of the war. But because everybody believed he did, nobody chased him. We were in touch with the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Special Investigations, the Wiesenthal Center, the Mossad, and every one of them, paraphrasing their response, said, well, no, we never went after Kammler. He was dead. We had limited resources. We had to go after living Nazis. So he escaped history, and he escaped justice as well.
Well, it was interesting because I found you start off the book interviewing his son. And I found the interaction between his son and his son's wife very interesting. Like I said, being from a family with European background, I could understand the wife being kind of like a little hedgy, but the son was willing to be talkative. But you also played him, and I found I could actually see this scene being filmed with you sitting there on a chair and just inching yourself forward as you draw the answers out, with the wife in the back going, "No, you don't. No, you don't."
It was. I mean, that was another sort of chilling experience for me, frankly. Going into that, I didn't know if this man, the son of Hans Kammler, was going to defend his father. If we were going to have a confrontation, I didn't know if he'd see me, because as I described in the Hidden Nazi in the book, I just sort of walked up on the house. I had been in touch by email, but I hadn't arranged a specific meeting, and I just took a risk since I was there in Germany doing research. So I was a little bit surprised but pleased to get in the door. I described in The Hidden Nazi, his wife is clearly the gatekeeper, clearly didn't want him speaking to me, so I'm in this very odd position of trying to coax information out of him with sort of a hostile witness off in the flanks there, trying to get me to wrap things up, trying to hurry things along, trying to coach him and tell him not to answer this, or let's not discuss that. We're going to move in another direction. It was one of the more challenging interviews I've done in my professional life, including examination and cross-examination of witnesses. But it was chilling, but it was also exhilarating at the same time. And I left there knowing that it was the mother, his mother, Kammler's wife, who had Kammler adjudicated dead by the German courts years after the war. 3 years after the war, she went to court, had him adjudicated dead so that she could get a pension for her children. But even after that, the family was looking for the father. We described this in The Hidden Nazi. So they had him adjudicated dead, but they didn't really believe he was dead. And I began to feel for this son, who was a grown up at the time, obviously an older man by then, because that entire family was left wondering if their father was still alive, and their two choices seemed to be he either committed suicide or he abandoned the family. Neither one of which is a great way to picture your father's legacy. And Jürgen Kammler, the son, we say it in The Hidden Nazi, he definitely recognized his dad was not a good guy, which is another sort of difficult legacy to grow up with, because the children of Kammler are of course innocent. They've done nothing wrong. So it's a fascinating interview.
Yeah, because you talk about Kammler as a young man, and he was nondescriptive. I mean, he wasn't good at athletics. He wasn't outstanding in academics. He was like a bleh. And here you guy that's just one of the crowd that you don't expect anything from. And yet he does meet his future wife. And I got the feeling from what I was reading that she may have been the most influential part of his life that may have brought him down the path he was on. He may have had inclinations, but she just brought them out, I think.
So that's very perceptive, and you're right. He was sort of undistinguished. He was born in 1901. He got his undergraduate degree. He got a PhD in architecture and engineering, and married his wife, who had a strong history of having already, at that point, this is 1930, had already belonged to Nazi organizations herself. And it's only then, 1933, we see Kammler join the Nazi Party, but he joined before Hitler became chancellor. And then less than a year later, he joins the SS, the dreaded Schutzstaffel, the murderous SS. He joins the SS before Hitler becomes president. And, it could very well be that his wife was sort of driving his ideology. I do know that he was, got some of his anti-communist beliefs from his father. And, he was a strong patriot. And, Hitler's appeal to Germany was to sort of rehabilitate it after it suffered this unexpected and embarrassing loss in World War I. Hitler was supposed to be the answer to sort of these notions of German pride. And Kammler, would have bought into that, I think, perfectly well. And he was probably goaded on by his wife.
Well, it's
Dean.
Go ahead. This is my co-host, Curtis C.S. Bennett, who's written, you're up to how many books now, Curtis?
26.
Wow. Hi, Curtis.
Hey, I didn't get an opportunity to read your book, but I will in the near future. I'm just surprised that Mossad, fell for this explanation that he committed suicide. They are usually a little more meticulous when going after, Nazis. How was it that they were fooled like that?
So I think that's a great question, and I think it's maybe a combination of things. One, it was the limited resources, and there was this sense of urgency. There was a wanted list. There were people that were known to be alive with certainty, known to have escaped with certainty, known to have killed people with certainty, and that's how they put together their most wanted list. Kammler was sort of. He was involved in the Holocaust from the beginning. He is the guy who chose Auschwitz as the site for the primary camp, and then built it out. It was already a camp, but he increased the size about 3 or 4-fold. He's the guy who designed the concentration camps barracks that you see everywhere throughout Germany. He's the guy who decided to cram more people into these barracks and to build them in substandard ways. And this was not just at Auschwitz. This is at camps throughout the Reich. But I'm not certain that outside of the Reich and the leadership that his role in the Holocaust was well understood. He then went on to play a major role in Germany's slave labor trade. But again, this was Kammler renting out the healthiest prisoners to the German government and to German industry, which fed the coffers of the SS, by the way. But again, I don't know how much visibility into the German regime we had or the Mossad had at that point. And then it was very late in the war that Kammler finally rose to real prominence and took over all of Germany's secret weapons.
Well, I don't want to get too
but
far.
Again,
I don't want to get too far ahead.
Go.
I don't want to get too far ahead because what I found interesting is he did train as an architect, and he ended up going into civil service. And now his foot was in the door. Here he is. He's a good Nazi Party member. He's meeting the right people along the way. And here at the age of 29, he is now given major projects. But he wasn't an inspiring architect. He didn't come up with like Gothic features or anything. His stuff was kind of plain, just Unitarian. He had no special skills, and yet this man was given tremendous power over large projects at the age of 25.
Yeah, and if he had a special skill, if he was able to distinguish himself, it was two things, I think. One is not a skill, but one, I mentioned he was early to join the Nazi Party and the SS, which put him, it gave him a level of credibility that lots of other people didn't enjoy. He was a true believer and ardent Nazi, and within that regime, that counted for a lot. The second thing he was quite good at was efficiency. I mentioned this in The Hidden Nazi in the book. He was to concentration camps and to killing, what Henry Ford was to automobiles. That's a bizarre comparison, but he mechanized concentration camps. He standardized everything, and then he mechanized death. He made it more efficient than anyone had. And the Germans, the Nazis, had been experimenting with ways of killing people in great numbers. Everything from shooting individual people and dumping them into mass graves, to these gassing vans, which were portable box trucks that they'd load with people and then run the exhaust into the box truck. And then they tried using different sorts of gases. And Kammler was visiting these different sites, figuring out what was most efficient. He just developed, it's bizarre to think about and abominable, but he became an expert in killing, and that's how he distinguished himself. You're right, though, that early on there was nothing to distinguish him. He was just one of a group, although even with some of those more mundane projects, he started doing them from beginning to end, and he's also pretty good at accumulating power, advancing his own cause, and opportunistically latching on to folks like Heinrich Himmler. He hitched his wagon to Himmler, which was pretty smart.
Well, Himmler had a way of just latching on to people that would help boost him up. He would see the town, utilize the town, and bring them into the SS, and he saw the ability in Kammler. And then Kammler is a good imitator. He saw what Himmler was doing and then proceeded to do the very same thing, which worked to Himmler's detriment later on.
That's exactly right. Both Himmler and Kammler, and Kammler learned at Himmler's hip. They would see something that was ascendant, something that was becoming, fad is not the right word, but something that was going to be useful and productive to the Nazi regime, something being produced by either the Navy or the Army or, German industry. And Himmler would go out and find the principal actors, the proponents of that, and give them a Nazi SS rank. And then they would become members of the SS. And as I mentioned in The Hidden Nazi, when Himmler offered, that was a door you didn't answer. You responded and you joined. And most people did. Very few people were able to resist him. So, if there was a weapons program that he liked, he'd give the leaders of it not an SS rank, and then he'd draw them into his orbit of power. Kammler saw this. Kammler actually was subject to this. That's how Kammler first came into Himmler's realm. But Kammler saw how this worked, and he began doing the exact same thing, imitating the exact same thing. And then they would do it together through the end of the war. And you're right. At the very end of the war, Kammler actually leapfrogged Himmler. He, I think, in power, eclipsed Himmler.
What I found interesting is Himmler's purpose was to create a deep state, a state within a state. So the SS became a government unto itself, separate and only answerable to Hitler, and sometimes not even then.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And, a casual observer of World War II might not pay attention to the difference between the German government and the Nazi Party and the SS. Those were all separate entities. The SS was the most diabolical of all of them. Himmler was the leader of the SS, and that was precisely their design to make a sovereign state for the SS. And in order to do that, you need power, which Himmler was excellent at grabbing, and you need money. You need a source of revenue. And that's, we get to the slave labor part that Kammler ruled for the SS. They found the most able-bodied prisoners and used them as slaves and rented them out, as I said, to German industry and to the German government itself. And to the German army, they were renting these slaves out, charging them, and filling the SS coffers. And that was their road to independence. And they were ultimately given the status of a separate sovereign state. People were making blood oaths and swearing allegiance to Hitler, not to Germany, not to the Reich, but to Adolf Hitler himself. It's an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, well, that occurred starting in 1934 with the Night of the Long Knives. Explain exactly what that was. Because everyone hears about the crystal knob. everyone knows Kristallnacht. And if you look at these Antifa out there, the very first time I saw them at Berkeley, I said, that's Kristallnacht. But no one really truly understands or knows what happened on the night of the Long Knives. That's when Germany made a complete divergence.
Yes, I mean that was a real, I suppose, turning point. This is June and early July of 1934, an incident or a series of incidents that became known as the Night of the Long Knives, and this is Himmler and Göring together, leaders of the paramilitary SA at the time, that were planning a coup. So the SS, led by Himmler, used its special security guard, the SD, to round up and then assassinate, sometimes with trials, but everybody ended up being killed. They just gutted the SA, which was a paramilitary organization. They accused it of planning a coup against Hitler. They used that as a pretense. That was sort of the most powerful rival organization that Hitler was facing at the time, and they basically decapitated the organization by rounding up its leaders and summarily executing them.
You know, it's funny because Albert Speer had interacted with Kemmler, and he had some not so kind words for Kemmler. The two of them really did not get along too well, did they? No,
Kemmler had few friends, and at first Speer didn't see Kemmler as a threat, but as the war advances and we see Kemmler gaining more and more power, Speer was in the inner circle, and he saw Kemmler as a threat. And then I think saw his true colors, saw that he was personally ambitious. Obviously, he wanted good things for the Reich and good things for Hitler, but his own credentials, that is Kemmler's own credentials, as we mentioned in the Hidden Nazi, were unusually important to him. He was an unbelievably ambitious man. Nothing stood in his way. And some of the descriptions of Kemmler we have from his colleagues, including Speer, are astounding. I mean, everything from his disdain, his obstinacy, his rare obstinacy, to folks calling him the worst person I've ever met, to Himmler's most brutal henchman. Phrases like that sound harsh, but when you think about the context, when you think that these are characterizations that are being offered by members of the SS, perhaps the most dreaded organization in the history of mankind, other members of the SS are saying this about Kemmler, that he's the worst of the worst of the worst. It really is a spectacular indictment of his character and also of his ambition. Nothing stood in his way.
Well, when you read about the Holocaust, you read about the concentration camps, and I have a friend of mine, her mother was a Holocaust victim. She survived the slave camps, and she had wrote a book before her mother passed away, and I was talked to her just before her mom was able to listen as we talked about her experience and everything. And you get a good feel from Naomi Litvin's book about her mom. But when I read your book, you delve so much more into it. And you had a meeting with a former slave coming out of nowhere. Someone had been in several of those camps, several of which he should never have survived, but he was there. We're talking about Joel Greenberg. You were talking to the son.
Yeah.
He was the son, and Joseph Greenberg was the father.
Right. So, that is another, and that's one of the things about the book, The Hidden Nazi. There are so many sub-stories and different threads that just came through powerfully in the book. What I haven't mentioned is one of the camps that Kemmler built from the ground up was in central Germany. It was called Dora Nordhausen. It was the largest underground factory in the world, and it was built by Kemmler's slaves in a camp that he built, Dora Nordhausen. The fellow you're talking about, I met his son-in-law, Joel Greenberg, at one of my work events, and I sort of laid out in broad strokes my book and this Nazi general. We were just having a friendly conversation. Joel had worked at the Department of Justice, OSI. He didn't know Kemmler, but he let me go through my entire story about how Kammler had built Auschwitz and built Dora. And he said, oh, my father-in-law, Joe Gringlas, is a survivor of Auschwitz and Dora, which is just a stunning thing. There can't be more than a couple of people that have survived Auschwitz and then were shipped to Dora and then survived Dora, because, as you well know, I can tell you're a student of the war and of the era, the final solution got pretty far down the path, the idea of killing every Jew they could. And in the very end, these death marches ended up killing so many other folks who were left. There were very few survivors at most of the camps, and the idea that somebody survived Auschwitz and Dora is just extraordinary. So I had the good fortune to go to his house in Philadelphia, sit down with him and interview him and learn what I could about his experience, which was a phenomenal opportunity. And I end up, it's a little obscure, I dedicate the book to my family, my loving family, and to B-2247, B-2248, B-2249. And as I explain in The Hidden Nazi, Joe Gringlas' number, his tattoo on his left forearm, is B-2248. And so I'm dedicating the book to him, but also to the person who was in front of him in line and behind him in line, and everyone else who suffered through the Holocaust, and many who lost their lives in the Holocaust. So that was just an unbelievable opportunity. And Joe Gringlas, I have to say, and we lay this all out in The Hidden Nazi, he faced down Dr. Mengele, Joseph Mengele, the angel of death. He was in the sorting line, looking up the line, seeing the table behind which Mengele sat. And that was the point at which people were sorted. You go to the left, you're going to the gas chambers and facing immediate death. You go to the right, you're a slave. And you face long-term outlook that is not so good as a slave in a concentration camp. He got up there and, told a little white lie about his age and his physical abilities. And Mengele said, okay, you go to the right, you're a slave. That's how he saved his own life. Yes, sir.
Dean, if any of these guys, these Nazi war criminals, were still alive today, they would probably be in their mid to late 90s, if I'm correct. Do you have any sense that anybody, including Mossad, is still looking for these guys?
Well, so that's a great question. I mean, at this point, the war is almost 75 years over at this point. So you would have to have been a pretty young man at the time of the war, meaning not a very high rank or not very much accomplished. Kammler was born in 1901 in what's now Poland. So he would now be 118 years old.
Wow.
So I'm convinced nobody's looking out for him. The time to find him, the time to track him down has unfortunately passed. But, as storytellers, we thought there was still time, and this is the right time to reveal the story, at least in The Hidden Nazi.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it's taken this long for it to come out, but these stories have been hidden, and there was a reason why they were hidden, because now one of the things that Kammler was involved in was helping to build the facilities, to build the planes, the munitions, the V rockets, all the other weaponry, because of his ability to get a job done so fast. It ended up coming all under Himmler's purview and eventually his purview. He had complete control over all of these things that they were doing. But why didn't we know about him? We know about von Braun. We know about the other scientists that the Americans and the Russians took over after the war to help develop our own munitions programs. But Kammler was unique.
He was unique. He was unique in the wingspan of his power. The breadth of his authority was absolutely extraordinary. You mentioned that at the end of the war, he's in charge of all of Germany's secret weapons, including the Vengeance weapons, the rockets, the V-1 and the V-2, but also including the jet airplanes, all sorts of technology that everyone was absolutely hungry to get their hands on. These were the weapons of war that were far advanced, far exceeded anything any of the Allies had. And whoever got these weapons at the end of the war, whoever inherited this technology, was going to have a huge head start in becoming a superpower. And you mentioned Wernher von Braun. He worked for Kammler. Kammler was his overseer. And we, the United States, I think won the Cold War, at least in part because we got the best German Nazi rocket scientists, including Wernher von Braun, but also including dozens of other folks. And we only got them because of what we call the Kammler deal in our book, The Hidden Nazi. It's clear that Kammler was in negotiations with the United States, and I can go through this tightly sequenced series of events, but he had been in negotiations with the United States well before the war was over. The rocket team was housed in northern Germany. The Soviets were about to capture the rocket team. Kammler signs an order to move the rocket team and keep them out of the way of the Soviet army into central Germany. Then it becomes clear that part of Germany is going to fall to the Russians. He moves the rocket team a second time, this time to Bavaria, southern Germany, right into the advancing army, the U.S. Army. So he basically hand delivers the rocket team to the United States, this incredibly valuable team of scientists and engineers who become our ICBM team. They become our NASA. Bob Hope has this joke, or had this joke, I should say, which has the ring of truth. And it was, we got to the moon first because our Nazi scientists were better than the Russians' Nazi scientists.
And which was the absolute truth. Because one of the things Kammler was able to do is that he knew where the armies were advancing, who was going after what, where. So when he saw that the Russians were coming into Prague, he made sure he got there ahead of time to help save the scientist and his staff, moving equipment and documentation and hiding all this stuff. He had it where he would break it down, and one hand doesn't know what the other one did, but he knew where everything was. He knew where all the bones were buried.
You're exactly right. I mean, he had so much power at the end of the war. He had visibility into so many different things. He was the master of transportation at that point in time. He ruled all transportation, so he had access to trains and planes. He could get anywhere. If anybody could get there, Kammler could get there. When it came to the collapsing Reich, he was the one who had freedom of movement. And we saw him. I mean, his nickname was Staubwolke, which is German for dust cloud, which describes his frantic pace as the German Reich is collapsing. He's moving here, there, and everywhere to try and collect the technology, the assets, the things he had promised the United States in order to try and save his own life.
Well, the funny thing is, here he's involved with the V-rockets, with the airplanes, with all the other munitions, and believe it or not, the German scientists, folks out there, were already working with fusion and fission, going from atomic to nuclear in the weaponry. And they were just looking at the proper delivery system, getting it down to the size of a suitcase. But he saw what happened to Rommel in Africa when the assassination attempt, when they almost got Rommel. So he had this thing where he always traveled in an open car. We could have 360-degree view around him, which brought to question one of these stories about his death by a Russian princess that was a compatriot, about him dying in a closed car, which didn't quite ring true because he never rode in a closed car, did he?
Right. You're exactly right. I mean, he feared being strafed from above by Allied planes. Germany had no air superiority at the time, and Allied planes roamed pretty freely. They'd go after a general staff car, obviously. So he always had the top down. He always rode in the front seat so he could get himself out of the car and into a ditch on the side of the road and try and protect himself if he was attacked. You sort of put your thumb on an important aspect of things there. As the years went by, the death story of Kamler, the suicide story of Kamler, began to unravel a little bit, and then we'd see refinements of the story, different changes. You know, his driver had the original story. That's the one that was believed by the court. That's the basis for which he was adjudicated dead. But then there were other, people started to ask, well, there's no body, there's no grave site. We've looked for the grave site with ground-penetrating radar, for goodness sake, we can't find that. Nobody returned his sidearm or his paperwork or his dog tags, identity disc, which were the German equivalent of dog tags. This guy, at the end of the war, was an Obergruppenführer, which is the highest commissioned rank in the SS. He was the equivalent of George Patton in the U.S. Army. So it would be, you'd have to believe that we'd lose George Patton's body in the field of battle somehow. It's just not going to happen. And when they couldn't produce a body, when there were no graves, then you start to see slightly different versions of his death. That, he didn't shoot himself, he did commit suicide, but it was cyanide, and it wasn't there, it was over here somewhere, but I'm not sure where. And then there were several different versions of his death, and that's one of the things that my co-authors of The Hidden Nazi, one of the things that triggered their curiosity, that if there's more than one version of a way a guy died, they're obviously incompatible. Somebody's not telling the truth, and perhaps nobody's telling the truth, and we found it to be the latter.
Well, the funny part is
that nobody was telling the truth.
Well, the funny part is anyone that knows anything about service in the military, and my co-host, who happens to be a veteran of Desert Storm, would tell you that, if you do lose a buddy, one of the things you do is you grab the dog tags. If they have any letters on them, you grab the letters. That was the most significant thing. I mean, it's one thing you may lose the body, but it's another thing you brought back proof of that death. And what I found amazing is how the story changed over time. Now, allegedly, he surrendered to the Americans, but then supposedly the Americans lost them. Oh, but no, wait a minute. No, they didn't lose them, but maybe they did. But they want them for trials in Nuremberg, so he has to be questioned. But we can't, and it goes on and on and on, and the lies that compound just make his disappearance that much easier.
Mm-hmm. It does. I mean, it's an unbelievable story of obfuscation. And it really does point out the importance of this man. The Americans, I'm convinced, and we lay it all out in The Hidden Nazi, and we document it. I mean, we're very clear where we say this is what happened, and other instances where we think this is what might have happened, where we're speculating, because there are some gaps in the information still. There are some question marks. Frankly, it's our hope that somebody's going to read about this book, read the book ideally, and remember that their uncle or their grandfather had mentioned this guy, and they've got a box of documents up in their attic, and it's going to shed a little bit more light on the Kamler deal.
Well, it has to. And the supposition is that a lot of these guys went into some sort of witness protection program. The question is what did Kamler have that was so valuable that the American government was willing to bury him in anonymity, hide him forever from not just their allies wanting to bring him to the Nuremberg trial, but from the Americans here in the United States, to know that this man committed so much atrocity. He was the one that was responsible for what type of chemical was used to kill people. He chose it, knowing full well that it was going to cause them to die a far worse death than if he had used a different chemical. He was the one who decided that the slave labor is going to work until they drop dead at their working station. He made those decisions, and yet he had to offer us something that was so valuable that we overlooked this. Hence the title of your book.
Yeah, right, yes. That was the calculation. And I think Kamler had plenty of value to offer. I think the most important things he offered were the technology behind the V-2 rocket, which became America's ICBM. It became our intercontinental ballistic missile, and it won the Cold War for us. I do think that the geopolitical landscape today would be vastly different if we had not gotten the German rocket team. And it was Kamler that handed them over. It was Kammler that produced them. He's the only one that was in a position to put them on his personal train and move them from central Germany to Bavaria, where the U.S. Army was advancing. And we have the order signed by Kammler doing that. On his personal train, incidentally, which is nicknamed the Vengeance Express.
I mean, it was even so much that when everyone was fleeing Germany with the fall of Hitler and the fall of the whole Nazi regime, Himmler wanted to get a plane, because they had these massive planes. They called them trucks. And we thought they only had one or two. Turns out they had a lot more than that. But Kammler had so much power, he could turn around to his boss and say, "You're not getting that plane. We're using it for something else."
Right. No, that's exactly right. You're referring to the Junkers 390. This was the longest-range aircraft of the era. It could fly from Europe to South America. And we developed information documents that show Himmler making a request for one of those, and Kammler just saying no. You can't have that, which is an astounding thing if you think about it. I mean, Himmler is one of the known bad guys, and here is the unknown figure in history saying no thank you to him. That's how much power Kammler had at the very end of the war. He could deny his boss the use of an airplane, and he did.
But now there was a supposition, like I was starting to ask before, about what actually happened to him. And when I was messaging back forth to Kylie, I told her that back in the late 70s, early 80s, I owned a travel agency. And I took a trip down to South America, going through Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina. And I had mentioned something that occurred, and she goes, very interesting. I was wondering if I had actually crossed paths with one of the villages he may have ended up settling in.
It's quite possible. I mean, our best information is after he performed his side of the deal. He delivered the rocket team. He also delivered other technology and documents. We have some information that would indicate he might have been in position to deliver treasure and gold, artwork that was plundered. He certainly knew where these things were kept. He built every underground facility in the Reich. He was involved in that. And when it came to sort of, if they couldn't offshore those goods, then they buried them. And they buried them in Kammler-built facilities. So more than anybody, he was the one to know, where the booty, the bounty was buried. And we think he gave that all up to the United States. And in exchange, got a free pass, escaped justice. And, we know he was in American custody for months after the war. Then we see a British extradition request asking that Kammler be turned over to Great Britain. Those V-2 rockets had been used mercilessly by Kammler. Kammler was actually out in the field firing these rockets, raining them down on London and Southampton and Antwerp. So the Britons wanted to try Kammler. So there's an extradition request in the folder, which means, of course, and this is February 1946, by the way. This is 10 months after the war, which means, of course, the Britons knew that Kammler wasn't dead. At least the people making this request. You don't make an extradition request for a dead man. And then there's a note in the file saying, we don't have an objection to Kammler's extradition. And then the paper trail just runs completely cold. There's nothing left of Kammler after that. It was as if he never existed.
Well, you know what
and from that point forward...
I was just going to say, what I found funny is he did try to get to his family at one point and tried to reunite with them. But after a while, he simply gave up. And what brought to mind is that having read several other books, and I have some friends that are authors that do some of this stuff too, the Germans had this policy that if the person in the family, the head of the family, someone like Kammler, were to die, that the sins of the father would not be visited upon the rest of the family. They get to go free. So one of the reasons why they would say he committed suicide is to let the rest of the family, go free, live their life without any blemish on them. It was just the German way of thinking. And I'm wondering if he chose that path rather than trying to rescue them and taking them with him.
Well, you might think that, but his attempt to get to his family was in April and May of 1945. His suicide, quote-unquote suicide, was in early May of 1945, after he failed to reach his family. That's when he reportedly committed suicide. But we know he didn't commit suicide. We know he was alive for at least 10 months later. I don't think he committed suicide at all. I don't think he certainly didn't commit suicide in the claimed year that his driver said he did, and I don't think he ever committed suicide. I think we lay out 3 different scenarios at the end of the hidden Nazi, and we sort of rank them in which is most and least likely. I won't give away the ending, what we think is the most likely, but I think we make a pretty good case we make a pretty good case for what we think is the most likely scenario. But certainly, he didn't die at the end of the war. That's for certain.
No, and as I was alluding to the alpine villages that you can find up in the mountains in Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, and what I found so amazing is that were we on Air Argentina? I forget who was hosting the group that was with us. But they took us up there, and this is a tourist village, and they would sell you these little German trinkets, the lederhosen and everything else. Oh, how quaint! After the war, these people got booted out of their homes, so they had no place to go. And you're thinking that maybe these might be German Jews or something, and some of us knew history a little bit better. So when I was reading your book, It just crossed my mind. Did I actually walk into one of these villages that he had been at or that he was at? It's very possible because a lot of the Nazis fled to South America. They fled to the Caribbean as well as South America, knowing full well they would not be extradited, and they went completely free.
Right. No, you're exactly right. There were South American countries run by totalitarian dictators, very sympathetic to National Socialism, very sympathetic to the Nazi cause, very welcoming of Germany's. Visas were granted by some of these countries in the thousands and tens of thousands. We know that lots of Germans, a lot of them just regular Germans, not ardent Nazis, but lots of Germans and lots of Nazis fled to South America. There was notice, really, that the war was going to be lost by the Germans for months beforehand. So there was ample time for people, especially people of means, people in powerful positions, to plan their own exit strategies. And they did. They weren't stupid. They got fake identity documents. They got aliases. They had tickets. They had ways out. It's a provable fact that there are German enclaves throughout South America. We came across a 1953 CIA report, so 1953, 8 years after the war, talking about these enclaves, the fact that there are German restaurants and whole entire German villages, a German Chamber of Commerce, things like that. It was as if you describe them as Bavarian villages. That's about what they are down there. You would think you're in Bavaria.
Yeah, it just was very, very
so
strange.
You might well have... You might have eaten in the same restaurant with Hans Kammler. Who knows?
But the funny part is that tourists were eating it up without knowing exactly why these villages were here. And to me, I understood, having, like I said, my father being a World War II veteran and having my family background.
Sure.
And I understood exactly what I was looking at. But I didn't dare say anything, for fear that it's like, all right, fine, you're trying to take tourism away from our country. How dare you? We'll never let you sell trips to here and again. No, but we've let it slide. Our American government has let it slide, and we have let people go unpunished only because they can hand over goods that we thought were worthy enough to let them forget about not just the 6 million Jews that were killed in the concentration camps, but the millions of gypsies and Catholics and political prisoners and prisoners of war that died at the hands of this man as slaves.
It is astounding, and that's one of the vexing things. I mean, there was a lot of emotion put into this book and the research and a lot of tribulations, but that's one of the most vexing things I found doing this research. It's the Nazis that had the most power and therefore were the most wicked that had something to offer at the end of the war. It was very clear the Soviet Union was going to be an existential threat. Their way, the Soviet Union way, communism was incompatible with capitalism, and the Soviet Union was hell-bent on world domination. Hitler, for all his evil, never really was out to conquer America. But now there's this new existential threat, and we were recruiting Nazis who were in a position to help us, and that meant they were the worst, most powerful people, including Hans Kammler. Those were the folks that were in a position to bargain. They had something to offer, as you suggested earlier, and that's doing the Hidden Nazi, the book. And that's one of the most troubling aspects of the whole episode. It seems like the most damnable people were the ones that had something to trade in the end.
And I thought it was not amusing, but somewhat sad that I remember that commercial Walt Disney put up with Dr. Braun, Werner Braun, promoting Disney and how nice, how wonderful NASA is. And I just remember my father and I looking at each other going, we don't believe he just did that. That evil man that filmed the commercial. But that's the American mindset. Dean, it has been a pleasure having you on there. We will have you back. I will have Kylie to have you back on, and we'll talk about Federalist things, about the Constitution and the law. But this is an amazing book. It's called The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil. To let you know, there is a description and a link on the show page, so when people click on the archive and listen later on, they can click on it and get to your book, which is at Regnery Press. God bless you for the hard work you do, sir.
Thank you. The same for you. And I've had a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure.
Take care, Dean.
All right. Check it out, The Hidden Nazi. Check on the link and get the book. It's an excellent book. Let's bring back, always fun to have him as a victim in the hot seat, John Tamny of FreedomWorks. Good afternoon, John. You also have a new book out, which is bound to get people pissed off on both sides of the aisle. It's called They're Both Wrong, a policy guide to America's frustrated independent thinkers. Good afternoon.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Yes, I aim with all of my books to anger both sides, and in this case, I go chapter by chapter, liberal, conservative, conservative, liberal, to show why the deeply held views of both sides are so often incorrect.
Well, I kind of took a little bit of an umbrage, and I'm sure that's exactly what you intended to do, because you went after National Review, and I've never considered National Review to be a truly conservative periodical. I stopped getting it because I started getting pissed off at them, because like you, I thought they weren't firing on all cylinders with a true conservative message.
Yeah, no, there's an argument for that when you think of William F. Buckley and how his conservatism was standing athwart an encroaching state, and you now have a modern National Review that embraces wage subsidies for the supposedly suffering Americans, that quite literally wants government to plan who can come into the country and who cannot, a National Review that supported the bailouts back in 2008, even though the bailouts caused the financial crisis and slowed economic recovery. It's not your grandfather or father's National Review.
What's funny, because when the bailouts were going on, my husband and I joking around, and thank God I married a like-minded person, not like James Carvell and Mary Matlin, but we just kind of like quipped at each other, you know what? If you want to give a bailout, send the bailout to each and every small business owner. Send $1 million to every single small business owner across the United States. Don't bail out Ford and GM and Chrysler and all the other idiots. Give it to us, because we will produce the jobs and give you the revenue back. And to us, it was a joke. But what do we have? We've got Democratic candidates that are basically saying the same thing. You've got Yang out there, $1,000 to everyone. It is crazy.
Yeah, no, it's especially crazy. And in fact, I have a chapter in which I address guaranteed income. We have people who quite literally crossed oceans and borders to get here. We have people just who wanted to taste economic freedom. They knew they could provide for themselves. We have heroic people who were injured to the point of blindness and losing of limbs, yet they figured out a way. They weren't going to be victims. And so I think people say it's elitist to say we don't need guaranteed income in a country like the United States. I think it's elitist for anyone lucky enough to live in the United States to presume that they are owed, in addition to having won the lottery, which is living here where they have endless opportunity to travel all 50 states to get the best job, that they think that somehow they're owed guaranteed income above and beyond that.
Well, here I'm going to challenge you because you said that we shouldn't have a means test for who should come here to the United States. But if you think of the very first vessel that ever landed here, there was always a means test. You had some way that in which you had to work your way over here. And once you got here, you had to be able to be self-sufficient. So there always was some sort of a means test. You had people that ended up selling themselves into, oh, good Lord, I just had a major brain fart. Not slavery. Oh, good Lord. It was the next step up.
Indentured servitude.
Thank you. That's it. That's the word I was thinking of. Indentured servitude. And the United States dropped that long after. And even into the 1900s, going into the turn of the century, Canada still had indentured servitude. There was always some sort of a means test to come over here, that if you came over here, you're not going to be on the dole. You've got to be able to survive on your own. And that was the largest means test possible until we built Ellis Island, in which my grandparents came through. And again, there was a means test.
Well, yeah, I hear your point, but you and I think, would blanch at the idea of Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell saying, okay, U.S. businesses, this is how many computers you can import, and this is how much steel you can import, and these are the goods and services. This is the quota that you can have in terms of the goods and services you want to bring in. We would blanch at that, but we're going to somehow allow government to choose the most important driver of progress of all, which is human capital. And I think that on its own is dangerous. But the other thing is, look, it's already means test. If you've got the courage to cross an ocean or a border, going to a place where you probably don't know the language and you just want to taste freedom, I think you've passed the test. Now, this notion that there's welfare waiting for those who cross the border, there's really not a lot of evidence supporting that.
Well, as a retired New York City cop, I've seen it. I've seen it where they were getting welfare, they were getting Medicaid, they were getting Section 8 housing. And there's always a way around it if you find the right organization that will help you to commit that fraud. It's out there. And I have seen it one-on-one. But that's besides the point. There shouldn't be anything. You come here, there's no safety net. The same way we go to any other country, we're expected to adhere to the law. If we go to Mexico, we can't get a job unless you bribe half a dozen government officials in order to get to a job. But yet we have free and clear. We're not even screening people for diseases, where we're seeing a rise in STDs, a rise in typhus, a rise in leprosy. I'm not just talking about whooping cough and measles and that, but leprosy. And you have law enforcement officers out there dealing with these immigrants and now with the homelessness that are getting these diseases. There has to be some way to screen so we don't spread disease, too.
Well, yeah, my response is, well, A, is the federal government the entity to do that at all effectively? But my other response is, if you really want to keep immigrants out, or if you want to slow the number, just elect Elizabeth Warren and give her the House and Senate, because the policies she wants would slow the economy and would greatly reduce immigration. Let's be clear that the greatest reduction in immigration in modern times occurred from 2009 to 2014. Was this because President Obama was particularly tough on the border? No, but as conservatives regularly pointed out, he wasn't very good on economic policy. And so it's a reminder that immigrants aren't coming here to get free stuff. They're coming here when the economy's good. And so if we want to have a growing economy, I think we've got to accept the fact that people are going to figure out a way to get here. That's just nature. It's what your grandparents did. It's what people do.
No, that I completely agree. One thing I love about it is you bringing everything back to the Constitution. And you point out, and I've said this many times, that all politics starts local. if we had things taken care of on the local and state level, rather than letting federal government, as it expands, taking over more and more, telling us what to teach in the classroom, what type of light bulb, what type of toilet. If there's something that we use in our daily life, there is a federal regulation covering it.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it on the head, and I think that's how my book begins. I say, is it any wonder that there's such divide? Is it any wonder that Americans are so political nowadays? And they are, because Republicans and Democrats no longer acknowledge that the Constitution is a limiting document that limits government on the national level, on the federal level, so that people can choose the kind of government they want. People say to me all the time, well, you're so anti-government. No. I'm anti-national government. I want decisions to be made locally. When Burger King rolled out the Impossible Meat burger, what did it do? It didn't force it on all 7,200 stores in the U.S. It tried it in St. Louis. It experimented. And so when Burger King makes a mistake, it makes it locally, or it does something well and it goes national with it. That's all I want with policy. If people want a lot of government, have it. And if you want a lot of immigrants, if you want to give them welfare, do it locally, make an economic choice, pay for it locally, but don't foist your values on us nationally.
Well, I had a huge thing with disagreement with Ted Cruz when he came out waiving the H-1B1 visas, saying we need to bring more of these people in. And at the time he said it, Walt Disney was doing this, GE was doing it, I think GM was also doing it, with their high-tech people. They were telling them, we're going to replace you with an H-1B1 visa. You're going to have to train them to take over your job. And if you don't do that, we're going to discontinue your severance package, and you're going to walk away out of here without a recommendation, severance package, nothing. And they were forcing these people to train immigrants being brought in on these visas to take over the jobs they already had. I disagree with that. I mean, if you have a hole in our system that you don't have someone to fill in for, fine. But if you already have someone in that job doing a good, competent job, then why are you going to bring in an immigrant to take over a job you already have?
Well, but my take is I think businesses are private entities. I think they should be able to do whatever they want and hire whomever they want. I think once you start telling businesses whom they can hire, you are inviting all sorts of government involvement in the economy that's going to ultimately harm everyone. And so, no, I don't think you and I would ever say to a business, you want to import foreign inputs. Oh, so shame on you. Let's put a tariff on you. Let's tax. That's wrong. That's wrong. Buy locally. I think you and I would say that that's incorrect. Well, why can't businesses import whomever they want in order to do that kind of work? And again, I think that a lot of this could be solved if, Santa Monica were free to offer all sorts of handouts to immigrants, and then maybe San Angelo in Texas would say, we're going to do the opposite. Let localities experiment with this, but let set businesses free to hire whomever they want.
I agree they should hire whomever they want, but if you already got someone in there doing the job you want them to do, they're perfect, they're excellent in what they're doing. But suddenly...
But implicit there, what you're saying is that they're not perfect. If they were perfect, if they were doing exactly what you wanted, you wouldn't feel the need to bring in someone from the outside. What we're seeing here, if this is in fact happening, and I've always wanted to meet all these American workers who've had their jobs taken by immigrants. I think it's a lot more, theory than reality. But if it's true, why can't businesses hire whomever they think is best? We always encourage individuals to get the best deal possible, to exchange their work for the best deal. Why can't businesses get the best human capital they think that will make it most possible for them to grow?
Well, from the few stories I read on this, when this first started happening back in 2012, is that these individuals had nice salaries plus employment packages. And the only reason why Disney did this and GE did this is because they could bring in an immigrant, not offer all the bells and whistles to them, and get them at maybe half to 1/3 of what you're paying an American worker.
Is that wrong? Is it wrong for businesses to get the best deal possible? They have shareholders, and if they're not pleasing their shareholders, if they're not achieving the greatest level of profit, their shareholders can walk. Now, let's remember, the assumption there, of course, or implicit there, is that businesses always seek out the cheapest workers. Well, if that were true, then San Francisco, New York, and Los Angeles would be full of just unemployed people not working anywhere. But in fact, that's where the vast majority of investment in the United States goes to. The simple truth is it's very expensive to hire low-priced workers, and it is for an obvious reason. Do you remember what you were paid in your first job? Did you stick with it? Well, obviously you didn't, because it didn't pay well enough. Low-paid jobs have high rates of turnover.
Which is why I had Liz Harrington on here earlier, because we were talking about the economy the way it is, because we have a high rate of turnover because precisely this is happening. People are seeing that there's a better job up ahead, and they're leaving those low-paying jobs for the better jobs, which brings me around to the minimum wage. See, I'm doing this to provoke you deliberately. Because I was
going to ask him about the living wage, the left pursuit of the living wage.
Because I've never been one who supported the minimum wage. As a kid working 3 jobs, put myself through college, as a small business owner, all the way on up, I've never agreed in it. I believed in being paid my value. And if I got Joe Blow standing next to me with his thumb up his nose and wasting half the day and I'm working my butt off, you better be paying me twice as much as you're paying him. But they came up with this minimum wage in the 1970s, and they just basically ruined the incentive for people to strive to be better.
Yeah, well, my view is that the minimum wage shouldn't just be zero. It should be less than zero. I should have the right to say hi, Mr. Jeff Bezos, I am so desperate to learn from you how you do things. I will pay you for the chance to come to go to work for you. Government should get out of the way, stop putting up barriers to people offering up their services at what they deem it's worth to be. And sometimes that could be negative. Interesting about this, and the way I frame it in the book, is that the left implicitly understand this. They understand that minimum wage just limit the ability of people to get jobs. And how we know this is Hollywood generally skews Democrat, but Hollywood, if you want to act in a film, you have to get a SAG card. And it's very difficult to get a SAG card. And why do they have those? Because they know that a lot of actresses and actors would say, if I can be in a Steven Spielberg movie, I will work for zero. I will pay them to be in it to get my shot. And so they don't want that. So they force a minimum wage on actors and actresses, which limits the ability of them to find employment. So both the left claim that the minimum wage doesn't keep people from getting jobs, but their very actions, one of the industries they control the most, reveals that they know that it in fact does.
Well, it's interesting because when they started protesting for the $15 minimum wage, and this was, maybe about 5 years ago when they started floating this idea, I had talked to someone about one of these local franchises that happened to be in McDonald's, and they said, you know what, they're coming out with these kiosks, and the kiosk is going to cost only $10,000. And I started doing the math. How many people would they need to do the job of this one kiosk? And you ended up looking at the business saving somewhere close to $50,000 a year to install a $10,000 kiosk. So why would you have someone demanding $15 minimum wage when this kiosk can do it at a fraction of the cost, increase the profit margin, allow the guy to expand to create more franchise locations, hire more people then to man those locations? So he would, in the end, despite the fact you're using automation to replace work, would also increase the amount of work.
Oh, without question. But see, this is where I'd say to you, look, 100%. And I make the point in the book. I say, conservatives say, well, hey, look at what minimum wage is. It caused businesses to automate. And my response is, they'd be automating for all the reasons that you just said, no matter what. We could lower the minimum wage to zero, and they would still have an incentive to automate, maybe even more, because low-priced workers are very, very expensive. And we know why, and you know why, because you quit those jobs. They're not forever, and so the turnover is high. And so, yeah, I am fully with you on this. That businesses should be able to employ kiosks and automate. But if you like that, why don't you like the process whereby a business says, okay, I can get a human to potentially work for a lower price? But why aren't they allowed to? Why are they allowed to hire machines but not other humans?
Well, here you need, what happens is when you do innovate, new jobs open up. Now,
without question,
I'm not completely sure that we were going to go down to a 4-hour work week. I don't know about that. I don't think we as human beings would be able to survive if we do that. We need something to do. Otherwise, you just waste yourself in leisure, and then you're worth nothing. So I'm not too sure. You're always going to have people that need to create and need to build and need to do. But,
I don't doubt that. I just think that what's going to happen is the productivity of the worker is going to rise so much that more and more businesses will say, okay, one of the ways that they'll compete to get workers is, look, you're producing so much in 4 days, we're shutting down on Thursdays. And there's going to be increased leisure. So I hear you. For me, I want to work every day, and I think you're kind of the same way. I enjoy what I do so much. I would never want to take extended time off. But for a lot of people, this would be the chance for them not to just laze around, but work 4 days a week, earn a very high wage and productive work, and then focus on different passions, focus on maybe learning a new skill that would enable different kinds of work.
Now, there is a comment in the chat room about corporations operating in the public good. Now, if you do have a corporation that's not acting in the public good, and that's when you vote with your wallet, correct?
Without question, for a corporation not to do well by its customers, to not do well by the people who live in its area, it's an economic decision that can run them off. And so what you see historically is that thriving corporations go out of their way, A, to please their workers because they don't want to lose them, but also to do good things in the community to bolster the image of the business within the community. And so successful businesses have historically built football stadiums, added bleachers to high school football stadiums, put on parades, all sorts of things to bolster their image in the community. Businesses have this incentive. They don't need a law. They don't need to be forced.
That I do agree. Your book is very interesting, and I had a laugh when I got to the chapter of affirmative action, having been the victim of it, being told that sorry, you're too white for the job. We need to hire minorities, and my co-host happens to be a minority, so he's probably chuckling on the other end. But when they come up with these ideas to try to level the playing field, instead of letting the cream of the crop come forward, the content of character to prove forward, they come up with these ratios and then lower the skill level and the intellect of everyone involved.
Yeah, and they rob people of the perception that they're there because of their talent. What could be worse? What they've done to people who potentially belong is people assume, oh, yeah, well, you're part of the protected class. So you're not here because you're good, but because of the color of your skin or your gender. And so you do nothing for anyone in doing that. And I make the same argument when governments are aggressive about handing out student loans and everything. There's always going to be kids who have rich parents and who have grandparents who donated a building at Harvard such that they can go there. They're always going to have those advantages. But what the poor and middle class used to have, the way they could differentiate themselves and lap these kids with all the privileges, they would say, I went to college and it was a local one, and I worked, as you say, 3 different jobs to get through. It was a major sacrifice. That's how they used to be able to differentiate themselves. Oh, you got through college. That says so much about you. But now, since government wants to make this a right, they're robbing people who aren't as connected of the avenue, of the way of signaling to businesses that you've got one ambitious son of a gun ready to work and work incredibly diligently.
Exactly. When you take away incentive for a man to try to strive to be better, and then you take away anything that the person should live for. And they go down this path of moral morass that we're seeing today. Too much idle time on their hands, and everything is just too easily given away. And if you don't work for it, then you will not completely enjoy it. That is something I've always said. And one of the things that you point out in your book is that it's not just the individual we're talking about, it's also government. We give government our money too easily, and we say, go ahead, fix these problems. But that's not the way it should be.
Well, it's not, because government, people who work in government used to be in the private sector. They don't have halos on their heads or anything like that. So all you're doing when you hand dollars, I hate when conservatives say, oh, hey, you rich liberals, if you don't think you're paying enough in taxes, just feel free to give the government more. Well, don't do that to me, because guess what? That's a tax on me. Every extra dollar that goes to government is an extra dollar that Nancy Pelosi has over the economy, and Senator McConnell has over the economy. I don't want government involvement in the economy as a tax, because they don't take in dollars. That gives them control over the economy's resources. I want less of that, not more.
Absolutely. It is a fantastic book saying they're both wrong, a policy guide for America's frustrated independent thinker. And as I said, you start reading it and you're going to get mad, either side of the fence you're sitting on, until you stop and you sit down and you start to think about what you're trying to tell them. And there was legislation at one point in time to have, whenever legislation came up before Congress, to state specifically in the Constitution where Congress had the authority to do that. We haven't done that in more than 150 years.
Yep, we've forgotten about this. Both sides have. I would tie it back to the 1930s. It was then that Republicans and Democrats decided that people couldn't experience a recession, and so government was going to step in. Well, let's be clear. There's nothing about economic growth in the Constitution. There's nothing about being protected from the economy's natural ups and downs. Government was never empowered to do that. But once you open the door to it, both parties decided government revenues could be used to do things for people. And it's grown and grown and grown. And all I'm saying is, hey, if you want a lot of it, if you want big government, that's your choice. But make it a local thing.
And as I said, all government starts off locally, because you vote the guy in for dog catcher, for sheriff, for council, and they go up the food chain. Next thing you know, they're in state government into federal government, and then they got all of your paycheck.
Yep.
Well, as I said, it is a very, very interesting book, and I know my co-host Curtis has a question back there. Go ahead, Curtis.
I just want to know what are your thoughts on this fake kangaroo court, this impeachment of our president?
I think it's an indictment of both sides, in the sense that the president is not supposed to be this important. And so both sides the Democrats plainly didn't want to accept the result of the election. And so they've just very dishonestly, I think, gone after every which way to get the president out of there. And of course, my book doesn't talk about this, but it talks about what an indictment it is of the country, that so many Americans thought that Trump was just going to ruin the United States. And at the same time, so many Trump supporters thought Hillary Clinton, if she's elected, we're going to be Venezuela tomorrow. I think both sides severely insulted this great nation. If either one of them could wreck this country, it's not worth saving in the first place. But the main thing is, if half the country's terrified of Hillary and half the country's terrified of Donald Trump, that's a sign of a presidency and a federal government that's got too much power. And so now we're wasting time with impeachment, but let's acknowledge we wasted time with it back in 1998. Republicans said at the time, well, Clinton has besmirched the office of the presidency, and we need him out of there. Well, this is what you get. You ultimately get this back and forth, and it's shameful.
Yeah, and there was a question in the comment about you wanting the 4-hour work week. You don't say in the book that you actually want a 4-hour work week, but you do foresee a time in the future where that would become a possibility. That, we have so much productivity that someone would have the leisure of saying, I only need to work 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. I don't need to do this. There's a matter of having a need and then the matter of having a want to do it. And this is, again, what you address in the book.
Well, my strong sense is that, yes, more and more it's going to be, businesses will say one of the advantages of working for us is that we have a 4-day work week, or we have more flex time. My guess is that's where we're headed. Now, some people say, okay, too much leisure, that's going to be a problem. But I think implicit in 4-day work weeks, implicit in automation, in automating away the work of the past, is that work is going to be more and more of an expression of passion by people. The three of us right now are doing something we plainly love. And I think more and more people will view work in the way we do as a result of all this automation, as a result of 4-day work weeks. And so I think the irony here is that as people are given more leisure time from their jobs, they're probably going to work harder than ever because work is going to be where they're a superstar.
Something that they actually enjoy doing, and which is the whole point of it.
Let's not.
It's not mandated. It's voluntary.
150 years. Yeah, remember 150 years ago, you kind of knew your path in life. You were going to get up. Once you were of age, you were going to work 6 days a week from dawn to dusk on a farm. You know, how well would the three of us do if that were our choice today? How ambitious would we be? How much would we love work? And so thanks to automation, thanks to tractors, thanks to fertilizer, people were freed from the farm. And more people are freed from factories and steel mills. And so work is going to, with time, more and more be an expression of of our unique passions. I do believe that we went from agricultural to a manufacturing economy to a service economy. I strongly believe the next economy is going to be called the entertainment economy, as in more and more people do for a job what they couldn't get enough of doing when they were young.
Well, John, it's an excellent book. They're both wrong, A Policy Guide for America's Frustrated Independent Thinkers. And if people want to get a hold of you, all they have to do is go over to FreedomWorks, where you are the Director for the Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks. Thank you, John, for joining us. And always welcome to have you back on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. I really appreciate it. Love to come back on sometime.
Absolutely.
Take care, John.
John Tamny. All right. And we've got our final guest up in the bullpen. We are going to not intimidate this man. Retired United States Navy Captain Ryman Shove. Good afternoon and welcome back, Ryman. It's always fun to have you on.
Annie, I'm so appreciative that you let me be back on again. I love your show.
Oh, thank you. I had so many things I started putting aside for you last night. I shouldn't say last night. Yesterday, I had 3 teeth pulled. So I did my notes 2 days ago. And as I was sitting on the couch in pain with the ice pack, and I popped some nice pills. I started feeling a little better. I started pulling up more and more stuff. So I don't even know where to start with you because there's so much to cover. One of the things we've been talking about, and it's a passion of mine, to recognize the men and women out there that do the hard work in our military as well as our first responders. And I know it's a passion with you too, but buried in the back of an email I got, oh good Lord, a couple of days ago, that there's a special op task force that has 50 combat awards in just one deployment. And we hear everything else in the news. We hear about the Trump and Ukraine gate. We hear about all these other scandals that are going on. But the men and women out there that are actually doing the grunt work that deserve to be on the front page are shoved to the back page.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think we're doing some incredible work, and it's the left. I mean, there's a real battle going on in our country right now between the left and truth, because there is no truth in the left. It is, and in my opinion, I'm a student of history, and this is really what America has been about since its inception of that seeking of truth. And you had those that wanted freedom and liberty in 1776. Those were the people of the right, in my opinion. And then you had the people that said, nope, let's stay with King George. We want to be servants. We don't want to be independent-minded, free, liberty-loving Americans. We want to be dependent servants to the king. And it was the liberty-loving people that won in 1776. But that idea of this wonderful document called the Constitution really wasn't fulfilled until 1865, because we had a segment of Americans, and they were Americans, even though the Supreme Court in 1857 in the Dred Scott case said that, Dred Scott had no case because he couldn't come in front of the court because he was black, and because he was black he wasn't human, because he wasn't human he couldn't be a citizen. That the idea of this wonderful document called the Constitution couldn't come into fruition until 1865, until the war was over, until we fulfilled that beautiful promise to say, oh no, everyone, no matter who they are, have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and it's going to be America that's going to give the opportunity to have that pursuit of happiness. And so I think what we're seeing right now is just this play in history playing out again of the left saying, you know what, we want to deprive the unborn of life because they can't have any liberty. They'll never be able to pursue happiness because that is our mindset. And so we're seeing this kind of play out again. And I turn on the television and I'm like, yeah, we fought this and won in 1776. We fought it for 4 years, 1861 to 1865. And you know what? I think we're going to win again because truth, liberty always wins in the end. That's my feeling.
Well, just to recognize this one unit, because I mentioned them and I want to do them the complete honor, because this is from Stars and Stripes. For their efforts, the soldiers of the Special Operations Task Force 102 earned 5 Silver Star medals, 7 Bronze Star medals with Valor Devices, 15 Army Commendation medals with Valor Devices, and 21 Purple Hearts. The medals were presented last week at a ceremony attended by soldiers, families, and friends at Fort Carson, Colorado. And according to Lieutenant Colonel Justin Hegnagel of the 2nd Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group, Airborne Commander, he stated that for 170 days of blistering a series of airborne, I had teeth pulled yesterday, blistering series of operations, we focused on disrupting the enemy in their strongholds, awarding them 48 medals to the unit for 170 days of combat. Wow. Is that not humbling?
Yeah, wow is right. And the whole time you're reading that, what do I feel? And I think every one of your listeners feel the same thing. Wow, what an incredible country. Wow, what an amazing statistic. Wow, don't we have some incredible Americans doing incredible stuff. But yet you turn on the television and it's America's horrible, our president's horrible, we have to impeach him. We don't really care about all the good stuff that's going on. We want to just put it in front of the American people, got to get rid of this president. And we don't really care of the good stuff that's going on. I'm on your side, Annie, and I know I'm with CS also. Love your co-host there, by the way. Love his writing. So,
all right.
I think like him. We're brothers, that's for sure. But no, I think just like you, Annie, and I would really think about what kind of country we'd have, Annie, if everybody turned on the television today and instead of seeing the crap that we're seeing, we saw what you just said. What a difference it would make.
It would make everyone a little bit more prouder and maybe a little bit more willing to give than to take. That would be wonderful. But, there's the golden rule, and I always say it the way it should be said, is that there are 2 commandments that Christ gave us. And the first one was, thou shalt love thy Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and all thy mind. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Upon this hangs all the commandments and the prophets. If we just live those simple 2 things, to know that there's someone there to guide us, God, and to treat our fellow human being as a human being, the same way we would want to be treated. Yeah. If you watched the rally in Minneapolis last night. And everyone inside that rally was having a marvelous time, going outside, and they were willing to interact with the protesters out there, just talking to them one-on-one as the way they would want to be treated. To see it erupt in the violence, you've got one side that's willing to say, hey, listen, let's talk, let's put the hand out, let's treat each other equally. And you've got the other side that says, no, we're going to beat you down, and no matter what, you will kowtow to us. Is this a republic anymore, or have we fallen into the socialist states of America?
Oh, I totally agree with your point, and there's a story that's coming in my head when you're talking about those two commandments. And what I was thinking of, if we did like you said, Annie, and just implemented those two commandments, guess what? You'd have no crime, you'd have no hunger, because if I have two loaves of bread and my neighbor doesn't have any, guess what? They're getting one of them, and if I have three and both my neighbors don't have any, guess what? We're going to each have a loaf. There goes the hunger. So you have no crime, no evil, no hunger, and that's why God said that, because you get rid of that selfishness, because you wouldn't be able to sleep at night because knowing that your neighbor's hungry, you take care of them, and that would solve those problems. When I was stationed in D.C., there was a rally called the 828 rally, and my wife and I got up early in the morning. We thought we were going to be we were going to get on the first metro train to go into D.C. And I think the first train came by, I think it was 6. Anyway, the first train came up, and it was so packed we couldn't get on it. The doors opened, and we just looked at everybody, and the doors closed, and it left. Nobody could get on because it was so packed. So we waited for the next train to get on. And because we felt we were going to be like real up close, and we ended up being about 2/3 back from the Lincoln Memorial. That's as close as we could get because it was just shoulder to shoulder. And I remember in front of me, there was a gentleman. He was probably in his 40s, and he had a daughter. And I thought this was wonderful. I didn't see a mother. I'm assuming that this mother was not in this family, but he had his daughter. She was probably a young teen, but totally disabled. She's in a wheelchair, where it has the pillow that comes up. She can't even hold her head up. She's got this head. It's holding her head up. She's laying on one side, and I'm like, wow. He got up and got this monstrosity of a wheelchair in because he wanted him and his daughter to sit there and see this rally about what's good in America. Well, the sun came up and it started getting hot, and I said it was just packed wall to wall. We couldn't move. And I see after several hours of this rally, the sun comes up, and she's getting hot, and she's uncomfortable. And I can see her motioning to her dad. I'm hot, I'm uncomfortable. And he's looking around like, what do I do? I can't even move myself, much less this cumbersome wheelchair that my daughter's in. And as he's looking around, I see other people walking up to him. What's wrong? What do you need? And he's telling them, my daughter's hot. We need to get out of the sun. Immediately, everybody picked up and parted like the Red Sea, all the way up to the side of the hill where the shade was. I'm watching this take place right in front of me. I'm like, man, I love this country. Everybody just stopped listening, stopped what you're doing, picked up all their stuff, squeezed in as close as they could to make room for this wheelchair as she motored it around up the side of the hill into the shade so she could continue to watch, but be comfortable in the shade and out of the sun. And as soon as she was taken care of, then everyone else kind of moved back into the open space that where they were before. But I'm like, man, I just so love this country when the kindness just ebbs when someone needs help and everyone's just like, what do you need? Let's make it happen. Let's do it now.
Which explains why you had a couple of thousand protesters outside and 80,000 Americans inside that auditorium last night. It's a small handful of people that we are allowing to control the message, and it's got to stop.
Oh, I have the Rush Limbaughs of the world has said, and I hear this over and over again, is the only reason that you're seeing what's happening now is that we have finally awoke. We have finally found a leader that speaks for us, because the leaders in the past just rolled over and did nothing. And now the reason that the left is so angry is because we finally decided to rise up and stand for what is right and what is true. And I love it. I think this is an exciting time to be alive, an exciting time to be an American. And, it bothers me when, I watch C-SPAN and I hear people call in and say, Donald Trump is full of hate. And what I hear is when Donald Trump is full of hate, I'm full of hate. When Donald Trump doesn't care, I don't care. When Donald Trump is racist, C.S. Bennett's racist. And I know C.S. Bennett's not racist. I'm not racist. We love our neighbors. We want to take care of our neighbors. But when I hear that, Donald Trump is XYZ, it's just pointing back at me. And I'm telling you, I've had enough of it because I'm not racist. I love my neighbor. I love my God. I love his son. And I'm tired of putting up with it. And I'm glad we're pushing back.
It's funny because
I'll tell you what is hate. And that's the fact that even last night when Donald Trump was doing his speech, his son, Donald Trump Jr., spoke at the University of Florida. But the hatred and the protests, weeks in advance before this happened last night, it's off the scale. They even wanted to go after the students who organized Donald Trump Jr. to be on campus. It's like they can only listen to one side, and that's their side.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, CS, and I just I have made a couple comments that I really think that the left really needs to be careful because we're peaceful and we're good, but I'm telling you, you can only push so far until I could really see something. Violent might not be the right word, but I'm telling you, you can only push good people so far until they say, you know what, I've had enough. And I can tell you the kind of ending point for me was, if you know my bio, my last 4 years in the Navy, I was in Washington D.C. I taught national strategy and policy at the National War College, so I'm surrounded by people from the left. These are Oxford, Harvard, Princeton kind of people. And I'm an open-minded kind of guy. I would listen to them. I want to understand your side. Which side are you coming from? And I'm like, gosh, that's just not fact-based. It's not living in the real world. But I listened, and that was during the time of Obama. I did not share Obama's views. I thought he was probably the worst president we've ever produced, but that's okay. He was elected. I served honorably. But what really was the tripwire for me was when Trump, on his inauguration day, as I'm sitting in front of my television, and there's Antifa destroying private property, setting a limousine on fire, and the cops stood there and watched. And that was the final straw for me because I'm thinking, you know what? That could be my house being torn into. That could be my car set on fire. I'm the one saying, please help. And the cops just stand there and say, sorry, I've been told by the people that I work for not to help you. What do you do at that point? Because it's too late. And I'm watching. I'm like, that's it. I'm not interested in what the other side has to say because that side is violent and it's not good and it's full of lies. And I've reached my limit. And I've talked to enough people to tell me the same thing. I'm kind of at my limit of trying to be tolerant. I'm tired of being tolerant of the people who have no tolerance.
Well, we were discussing this earlier because we're finding more and more people. We had Liz Harrington, the spokeswoman for the RNC, on earlier, and she's agreeing that we're seeing people that may have voted for Obama, may have voted for Hillary Clinton in the last election, but when they see this violence and they see the one-sided hatred and they see the Trump mania, they're all of a sudden saying, wait a minute, this is not the America I grew up in. This is not the party I thought was representing me, and they are coming over either as independents or doing the complete walking away and becoming conservatives and Republicans because they understand we're not here to beat them up. We will have a discussion with you. We may not agree with you 100%. You can probably get two Republicans, staunch Republicans or staunch conservatives, have a conversation and still find something to disagree with, but do it in a polite and friendly manner. And this is what used to happen. You used to be able to sit down with family and friends and may politically disagree, but you were still friends.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the absolute genius of our founding fathers in the way that they created this republic is that the real purpose of the elections is that every 2 years you have a relief spout, a relief that lets off the pressure of, I don't like what's going on, but in 24 months, I'm going to go vote again. My vote will be honored, and I can change direction. And so if you look at just the genius of our founders, that in 2 years, we can change out 100% of the House of Representatives and a third of the Senate. In 4 years, we can do the House a second time, 2/3 of the Senate, and the President. And within 6 years, we can change out the House 3 times, the President once, and the entire Senate. In 6 years, you can change the entire direction of Washington if the people decide so. That's a great relief valve, because if you don't like it, you can fix it. When it stops working is when you vote and someone says, you know what, your vote doesn't count. And, oh, by the way, if your candidate wins, we're just going to impeach him. We're going to drive him in the dirt. Well, then you get to the point of, well, then my vote doesn't count. Well, then Annie and CS, what do you have left at that point? You either stand up and have a 1776 again, or you just go down in history and thrown on the ash heap of history as it wasn't worth defending, because the left is evil and they never stop. And you're right. I think there are a lot of people who are Democrats who have looked at this and said, yeah, if I don't get my way, I'll vote in 2 years. But I don't like this idea that we're just going to start burning things and we're going to wear bandanas over our face and we're going to beat people. I don't like that, because what if I end up being those people, the whole thing of they came for the Jews and I said nothing, and then, they came for the Presbyterians and I said nothing, and then finally when they came for me, there was no one left to say anything. Well, exactly. You don't want to be that group at the end. And the left, the evil part of it, it never stops. So you're absolutely right, Annie. You're absolutely right.
Well, it's funny. Several months back, there was this immigration protest that was going on nationwide. And here in my local town, they decided to gather at the local high school to have this pro-illegal alien protest, to support these illegal aliens here committing crimes. And we decided we were going to do a counter-protest. Well, they were about maybe 300 to 400 people, and we were 5 of us. So I grabbed the American flag, and it was the 5 of us. My husband was with me, and if anyone looks at my Facebook page, they'll see my husband, Yanni, holding the American flag, wearing a MAGA hat. And as the protesters came for us, and we were there with the pro-Trump signs and everything, some of them tried to challenge us, try to get into a fight with us. And all I did was I said, we're going to sing God Bless America. No matter what happens, we will continue to sing God Bless America. And as this group of about 350 people marched past us, we continued to sing. And you know what? Some of the people in that group marching were actually starting to sing with us and would give us a thumbs up, because they understood that in order to have a conversation, 2 sides have to get together and have to make our sides known before we can find the happy middle. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. It's interesting times. That is a fact. But I love it. I was watching Trump last night in Minnesota, and I was just laughing and laughing. I mean, this guy definitely entertains me. But I love what's going on right now, because I just feel like I finally have a voice. I didn't feel like I had a voice under the 8 years of the Obama administration. I just kind of cringed. And I like what's going on now. I'm a whole lot more concerned, Annie, for 2024 than I am 2020, to be honest with you. I think 2020 is going to be a huge sweep. But 2024, when the president's time is up, it gives me a pause for concern. It really does.
Well, then hopefully,
Captain,
by then, enough of America will understand what they're fighting for, and will start to flip everything around. Curtis, go ahead. We got about 8 minutes left. So,
what's on the agenda for Turning Point in America in the near future?
Well, I appreciate that. That's a great lead-in. First of all, we have moved from Turning Points in America to We Can Be Heroes Foundation. We're not actually a foundation now. We've expanded some of what we do for veterans. The biggest thing that we do is this will be the 7th year in a row that we've honored what happened in Benghazi. And just for your listeners, let's go back to 11 September 2012. That's when Chris Stevens and his staff was serving honorably in Benghazi, and they came under attack from enemies of freedom, from enemies of our country, and they called out, and they were under attack for 13 hours. They called out to the most powerful government in the world. They called out to the most powerful military in the world for 13 hours, and they got nothing. They were abandoned. They were left. And if you know the end of that story, we never did help them. How they got out was they requisitioned a oil company Learjet, and ironically, a Libyan C-130 that had been used by Gaddafi. Gaddafi did more to help the Americans on 11 September 2012 than the Obama administration. And, of course, Obama had Gaddafi killed. So not very good for Gaddafi there, but he was the only one that helped us. Of course, he was dead at this point, but the C-130 was from his staff. So they did more to help us than our own country. And so we're the only group right now that we know of that has not forgotten what happened on September 11th. This October 26th will be the 7th annual remembrance of those guys that died. There was 4 of them, 2 SEALs, an information officer, and, of course, Ambassador Chris Stevens. This year's speakers is Claire Lopez, and if you're watching the Values Voter Summit, she's one of the speakers. She is a former CIA officer, incredible speaker. Adam Francisco, he is an expert on Islam. Ken Timmerman, I heard him speak Monday. He's an incredible speaker. I highly encourage you to get him on your show. He is a Nobel Prize nominee and an expert on Iran, and he also worked with Trump on his national security team for a while. Phenomenal speaker. And we have Morgan Brittany, and both of you guys actually know Morgan Brittany because you remember the show Dallas from the 80s, the Ewing family?
Never watched it.
Oh, I took a picture with her.
Yeah, you know, I know, CS, you've already met her. But Morgan Brittany was the actress that played the bad sister.
I think,
go ahead.
Curtis, I think...
Politics.
Yeah, we met her up in Myrtle Beach at the last South Carolina Tea Party Coalition convention. I introduced Claire Lopez to Curtis at that same convention. Ken Timmerman has been on the show in the past. I haven't had him on in a long time, so I should have him on. So a lot of these people are thing. But I'm also going to propose to you, because Curtis will not be able to co-host with me next week. Would you be willing to co-host with me?
Sure, I'd love that. That'd be an honor, Annie.
Well, this is a lead-in because next Friday we will have Brigadier General Robert S. Spaulding. He's with the Hudson Institute and also has a book out, Stealth War. Michael Barone, you know him from Fox Business, National Review. He's got also a new book out about the political parties. John O'Connor, who was the attorney for Deep Throat, has a new book out about Watergate called Postgate. And returning is Liz Harrington. She is the RNC spokeswoman. So we've got a lineup next week that you will fit perfectly in with, Ryman.
I appreciate that, Andy. That's an honor. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, my pleasure. And I want to thank you for joining us. We're down for our last few minutes. Curtis, it has been a blast. I managed to survive having 3 teeth pulled. And Ryman, I told Curtis before that the teeth were so hard to come out, I thought the dentist was going to climb up on my chest. So I got a bruise on my chin from the dentist pulling out these teeth. So that's why I was having a little problem with my speech, but we'll be better next week. But that's all we got for today. I want to thank everyone for joining us.
Can I get 20 seconds?
Go ahead, real fast.
Can I get 20 seconds, Annie?
You got it.
Okay, we can be heroes. If you want to do it, We Can Be Heroes. Just Google We Can Be Heroes Foundation. It'll bring you up. You can get tickets. Tickets start at $45. It's October 26th here in Jacksonville, Florida. October 26th starts at 6:30 at the University of North Florida. Love to have everyone there. We're going to honor those guys that got left behind.
All right. Well, I'm going to make sure I change the website because I've got Turning Points in America down there, and I'm going to make sure We Can Be Heroes is going to be up there instead. So thank you, Ryman. And I'll be talking with you during the week. God bless for the hard work you do. So, Curtis?
I'll be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That is all we've got for today. So I'm going to end up the show. And where was my song? Here we go. Told you we're going to be ending the show with Gary Picarella out of Charleston, South Carolina. His new song out, Save America. Until then, I say to everyone, good night, God bless, and see you next Friday.
Good night.
I'm praying for this land I love, America, America, the home of the free. But there are people making plans to change America. They've no respect for her or what matters most to me. That's why I stand for the flag and I kneel at the cross. For the friends I have loved and lost, and I still believe in God we trust, and the freedom our forefathers granted us.
90 seconds.
It's not too late to save America. America, we've got to rescue her. You know it's up to me and you to see the truth behind their lies. Don't change America. God bless
60
America
seconds.
and the red, white, and blue. That's why I stand for the flag and I kneel at the cross. For the friends I have loved and lost, and I still believe in God we trust, and the freedom our forefathers granted us. I hope it's not too late to save America.
10 seconds.